The foreman offered to walk Annie, Arnold and Kelly around the house, and they declined. Everything had been thrown out and the place was practically empty, except for anything that was metal. Annie knew that there wasn't a lot of metal things that they owned, so walking around practically empty rooms would only make her feel worse about the whole thing. The three of them left and climbed into the car and Annie pulled away from the curb. "Kelly and I plan to take you anywhere you wanted to go today," Annie said to Arnold. "Is there anywhere you would like to go?" "Where can I go to have some fun with Kelly?" Arnold asked. "Well, there are a few places I know of," Annie said and thought about it. "Kelly? Any ideas?" Kelly thought about it. "Maybe the museum. I haven't been there in a while." Annie didn't let the surprise show on her face. "Of all the places for your first date, you pick a museum?" she asked herself and smiled. "Okay. First stop, the museum." Annie drove the car around several streets to get to the main road that most of the traffic in the town used at some point during the day, and the car easily merged with the flow of traffic. They traveled pretty fast along the pavement and passed a work truck. Annie slowed down because she saw several people working near the road. Kelly gasped when she saw who it was. "That's Brad," she said and pointed, and Annie and Arnold looked. "Why isn't he in jail?" she asked and let her anger show. "Wait a minute. Why haven't we heard about this?" Annie couldn't help it and her anger showed as well. She didn't slam on the brakes and try to run the bastard over like she wanted to, though. It wasn't because she had witnesses in the car, either. It was because Brad wasn't alone and the woman looked like she was keeping a close eye on him as he worked. "He's picking up trash," Kelly nearly yelled. "He wrecked your home and all he's doing is trash collecting. What a rip-off." "Kelly, calm down," Annie said, even though she didn't want to calm down either. She took the car back up to full speed after they passed the work area. "When we park, I'll give that officer a call." "That's a great idea," Kelly said. "Maybe he can explain this travesty of justice." Annie nodded and drove over to the museum. She parked in the parking lot and they climbed out of the car and stood beside it. Kelly handed over her cell phone and Annie took out the business card that the officer had given her and she dialed the number on it. "I hope he's working today," Annie said. "Otherwise." The phone rang and there was a series of clicks, then a man's voice spoke when the ringing stopped. "Officer Holman." "Officer Holman, this is Annie Strickland." "Annie," he said, a little excitedly. "It's so nice to hear from you. You might not think that when I ask you what the hell is going on with my case," Annie said, and anger was clear in her voice. "What do you mean?" Officer Holman asked. "I just drove by the main road and saw two of the bastards that wrecked my house are doing community service and aren't in jail." Officer Holman sighed. "They assigned them to that already?" "What do you mean already? How long have you known they were out of jail?" Annie asked. "Their court case was on Monday. The prosecutor sent out notices to us on Tuesday about the judge's decision." Annie was quiet and stared at the ground as she tried to compose herself. "Well, Mr. Asshat, why didn't you call me and tell me the criminals that assaulted my house, and might have assaulted me, were out and roaming free? I drove by your house every day since then to keep an eye on it," Officer Holman said. "I don't give a fig what you did. Why didn't you tell me? I'm standing here in the middle of town with my son, who they had actually come to assault, and I had no clue that Brad and his friends are all out and around the town. How in the world is that safe for me and my son?" Annie yelled. "Tell me how that's safe for my son." "Annie, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you in person. I kept checking to see if you were home and I only saw your car at the house a little while ago," Officer Holman said. "I'm actually still on patrol and couldn't call." "Have you been on patrol 24 hours a day since Tuesday?" Annie asked and did her best to not yell. You could have called at any time to meet me in person and then tell me that my life was in danger. You could have at least warned me about letting my son come back here and putting his life in danger, too. Where are you now? Officer Holman asked. I'll come over and... Annie, wait *** click. Annie hung up the phone and dialed the station number on the card and waited. The police chief, please. Yes, it's very important and involves one of his officers and a potential assault. Annie Strickland. Of course, I have no problem waiting on hold, thank you. Wow, Annie. Kelly stared at her friend, who just happened to be Arnold's mom. No one messes with my Arnold. Annie said, and the three of them stood there while they waited for the police chief to pick up his phone. Oh, damn. Officer Charlie Holman said as the call ended. He was only about halfway through his patrol route and he couldn't stop it to go and try to find Annie in the middle of town. He picked up his radio and called the dispatcher, then asked to be transferred to the police chief. Hey, boss. I screwed up. Charlie said and started to explain what happened. As the police chief listened, he became less happy at each successive word, especially because he had Annie Strickland waiting on hold to hear what he had to say about the whole thing. Annie, Arnold, and Kelly stood there for almost 15 minutes before Annie jerked a little when the cell phone clicked and the on-hold music stopped. It's about goddamn time. Annie thought and tried to rein in her anger. She didn't want to sound like a raving lunatic while she talked, because that was not how she wanted to be perceived. Miss Strickland, this is Police Chief Morris. The police chief said. What can I do for you today? You can file a formal report against Officer Holman for conduct unbecoming an officer of the law and for public endangerment. Annie said. I'm sure that we can discuss. I wasn't discussing it, Chief Morris. I was telling you. Your officer has intentionally put my son, and by extension myself, in imminent danger for the last 5 days. In fact, the danger was more prevalent during the week, because we didn't know that our assailants were out and roaming free. Chief Morris sighed. Miss Strickland, it's not normal policy to disclose case specifics with. I've been roaming about my hometown all week, and the large group of men that came to my house and destroyed it, have been out roaming free the entire time. I could literally run into them anywhere. In fact, I passed the main instigator when I came into town and that told me all I needed to know about how little your officer regarded my son's and my own personal safety. Miss Strickland, there's no need to overreact. Chief Morris, you better start writing that report, because the next call I'm making is to a reporter I know. Annie said. Either you reprimand Officer Holman right now for letting his personal feelings interfere with his job and endangering my son and myself, not to mention my son's girlfriend that the perpetrators all know, or you can reprimand him after the front page story appears in the paper. The choice is up to you. Miss Strickland. I'd like to know how the felony charges were reduced to only community service. Annie said. I'd also like to know why I wasn't called in to testify at the hearing, since I was the victim of their crime. Miss Strickland, it's not normal policy to disclose case specifics with. Now that I have you on the phone, I have another important question. Annie said and cut him off. The police chief managed to stop his sigh this time. Go ahead. Where is my husband's body? Annie yelled. Excuse me? Chief Morris asked, surprised. I've been waiting several weeks for the funeral parlor to call and let me know when the funeral arrangements will come into effect. When I called them to see what the holdup was, they told me that the police haven't released his body yet. Chief Morris couldn't stop his sigh this time. Miss Strickland, I'm terribly sorry for causing you such distress. I'll do my best to rectify the situation, both of them, as soon as possible. I certainly hope that's true for your sake, because everyone will be reading about it tomorrow, and I suspect you will be getting a lot of interesting calls. Annie said with a smile and hung up the phone. Oh. My. God. Kelly said and took Annie into a hug. That was scarily awesome. Annie had to chuckle at that. Don't make me laugh. This isn't funny. You just kicked the chief of police in the balls and told him to like it. Kelly said with a grin. Why can't that be funny? Annie laughed and pushed her away. Stop that. I need to make a call. Kelly nodded and Annie called the woman from the company her husband used to work at. After a quick talk with her, Annie got the number for the reporter that had shown up that day to report on the life insurance story. After another quick talk, the reporter begged for her to give her the exclusive story. She also told Annie to stay right where she was because she would be there as soon as possible to talk to her. You two can go inside. Annie said. I think I'm going to be busy for a while. You don't want us to stay and help? Kelly asked. Annie shook her head and then smiled. You two go have some fun while I conspire to take down the slightly corrupted police force. It's too bad you couldn't take down the prosecutor and the judge, too. Kelly said with a laugh. You know they took it easy on Brad and his friends because of bribes and favors. Annie nodded. I knew as soon as the chief of police said that he couldn't discuss the case that some kind of backroom deal had to be made. Kelly sighed and put a hand on her arm. We're going to get through this, okay? Yes, we are. Annie said and pat her hand. Now get going and enjoy yourselves. Kelly took Arnold's hand and led him up the stairs and into the large museum building. There was no fee to get in, but there was a donation box and Kelly put a couple of dollars in it and led Arnold through the lobby. Most people liked the paleontology display. Kelly said and pointed to the room where that was. Not me, though. I wasn't as fussy on dinosaurs like a lot of people. I know. Arnold said. I also know what you really like. Oh. Do you really remember what I said on the school bus going to my house so long ago? I always remember important things. Arnold said and she blushed a little. The map in the lobby said it's over there. He said and pointed. Kelly turned her head and looked. You really did remember. She said and blushed fully as Arnold led her over to the Egyptian artifacts display hall. I don't know why I find it all so fascinating. She said and they stopped at the first glass case with a broken golden scepter and half of a faded golden mask that looked like an eagle. An almost completely different civilization. Different social rules, dynasties, a ruling class that did their best, most of the time, to keep their people fed and working, and they were worshipped like gods and goddesses. They moved on and stopped at a scale model display of the Giza pyramids. The engineering feats they performed were nothing short of astonishing. Kelly said and touched the glass. Imagine making the Great Pyramid, over 750 feet on each side and 480 feet tall, and all you had was a long slow incline, wooden logs and water, and thousands of people working on it. Arnold looked at it and tried to see it how she saw it. All he could see was a pyramid, however. Kelly pointed at a small block off to the side. Each one was about 2.5 tons and the Egyptians moved millions of them to build all of the pyramids. She said. No cars or machines to help. It was all basic manpower and they accomplished so much with so little. Slave manpower. A man's voice said as he walked over. Thousands of slaves did the work. That's not entirely true. Kelly responded. Lots of Egyptians worked on all of the different wonders they created and it wasn't all done by slaves. The man started to frown and Kelly shook her head. I'm not saying what they did was good or the end justifies the subjugation of an entire caste of people. It was a different time and we can all look back and judge them with our own values now. I'm just saying that they used the resources they had available and accomplished amazing things. The man couldn't counter that argument, so he gave her a slight nod and walked on. I think you're going to like this next part. Kelly said and led Arnold by the hand and went into a small side room and it was filled with small display cases. In the center of the room was the jewel of the collection. A real mummy. It was behind glass and couldn't be touched. Even so, some of the wrappings had fallen off its face and revealed its dried-out eye sockets, and the teeth were exposed because the lips had receded. "It looks like she would have had a nice smile," Kelly said. Arnold looked at the teeth, and most of them were intact. "When I was young, I sometimes imagined that I was an Egyptian princess. I wore the big headdress thing and a nice long white dress, and I even had suitors come from all over the known world to beg me for my hand in marriage," Kelly said with a laugh. "I guess that's one reason why I like this so much. I had a lot of fun pretending to be a princess." Arnold nodded and looked around to see that they were alone. "Do you want to have some fun now?" Kelly smiled and nodded, so Arnold took her around the mummy's display case. Before she could stop him or even say that they shouldn't, Arnold had her jeans and panties down to her knees and knelt. "Princess Kelly," Arnold said, and looked up at her to see her bright red face. "May I be your suitor?" "Why yes, please," Kelly said with a shaky voice. Arnold kissed her there, and Kelly was very glad that no one was in the display room with them, because she had a hard time being quiet. A very hard time. She was surrounded by the golden remnants of her fantasy land, and she had the man she loved on his knees in front of her. Kelly couldn't have come up with a better fantasy if she tried. "Oh, geez. We got another adventurous couple," a security guy said when he looked at the computer monitor and it flicked to the Egyptian display and showed the mummy. "Is she hot?" his partner asked, and the first guy hit the camera code for the display. "Hey, not bad. If she lost the sweater and put on a bit more makeup, I bet she could be a real looker." His head still in the way, the first guy said, disappointed. "Do you want to walk by this time or should I?" "I'll do it," his partner chuckled. One authoritative scare coming right up. Kelly was floating on a cloud of bliss. She was thankful that the mummy display had a solid wooden back on it, because she was leaning pretty heavily on it to support herself. Her eyes fluttered open and closed as she tried to watch Arnold working her over, because it was something she wanted to remember for as long as she lived. "I really hope there's no one in here that's half naked," a man's voice said loudly into the side room. "Eep," Kelly said loudly and jumped a little. It would be a real shame for someone to walk in on them with the tour going through in a minute. The man continued and didn't acknowledge Kelly's startled reaction. "Hey Arnold," Kelly whispered loudly. Stop, please." Arnold did, then cleaned her off a little before he helped her pull her underwear back up. Kelly grabbed her jeans and yanked them up hard, secured them, then combed her brown wavy hair with her fingers as if it had been messed up somehow. "Let's go," Kelly said, her face still bright red, only this time from embarrassment for getting caught. She took Arnold's hand and they left the small side room, only to see that no one was there. They quickly looked around at the other displays in the exhibit, and Kelly wasn't as excited about it as she had been before. She just couldn't stop thinking about how Arnold had done that for her, in public no less, all because she said she had fun being a princess. "There's a nice wildlife animal display up on the second floor," Kelly suggested, and they went up there. "Ha ha 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 ha." The security guy still in the office laughed. "How was that?" his partner asked as he came back into the office. "Perfect. That poor girl beat feet so fast out of there that I'm surprised there's not sneaker marks on the floor." His partner laughed, too. "I was tempted to follow them around, but I'm pretty sure they're not going to try that again anywhere else." "Are you sure?" "There's some good hiding spots in the wildlife displays," the first guy said, and gave his partner an apologetic look. "You didn't hear that from me." His partner laughed again. "I'll keep the secret, as long as you tell me where." "Deal," the first guy said with a smile. "This is amazing," the reporter said after she heard Annie's story. "I don't know if I'll be allowed to say the officer's name, though. There's no way I'll get corroboration from the police department." Annie chuckled. "I doubt you'll get anything except them saying that it's being handled, just like I did." The reporter nodded. I can see if any kind of report on him is being filed, though. I know someone in the records department. Is there any chance you can have them check what was going on with my husband's body? Annie asked. There has to be a reason they kept him so long. The reporter nodded. I'll ask, and I'm pretty sure he's going to say that it's red tape, she said, and Annie gave her a wide-eyed look. Whoever is working on the case just didn't send the release notice to the morgue, and they can't release evidence until given permission. Detective Tanner, Annie said as she immediately remembered the woman's name and then sighed. She had me visit and identify him, even though his face was. She closed her eyes and held back the tears at the remembered sight of her husband's mangled face. She felt a hand take hers, and she opened her eyes to see genuine concern on the reporter's face. It's all right. It's an underhanded tactic that a few of the unscrupulous ones use to try and see if your grief is genuine or if you're faking it. What? Annie asked, surprised. What better way to see if you were involved in the accident by watching your reaction to seeing the body like that? The reporter asked. Oh, my God. Annie said softly. That really is underhanded. It's a good tactic in a more prolific and not as easily explained death, especially if there was some kind of complication with it. The reporter said. Doing it in a drunk driving case where they determined it was an accident? She shook her head. I'd say the detective is just hunting for things because she can, not because there's anything to find. Annie nodded in understanding. Sometimes you couldn't help looking for conspiracies if all you did was look for conspiracies. Thank you. The reporter smiled and let her hand go. No, Annie. Thank you. I'll get back to the office right away and write this thing up. It might be broken into a couple of articles, though. Is that okay? Annie nodded. As long as it gets out there, I'll be happy. The reporter smiled happily. I wish that all the people I talked to were as nice as you. Annie smiled back. Would you have any real stories if that was true? Not many interesting ones, anyway. The reporter said. I'll call the cell number you gave me to let you know what happens. Thank you. Annie said. I told the police chief that everyone would be reading about it tomorrow, and I completely forgot that it's Sunday. The reporter laughed. If the story gets approved for the Monday print, I'll do another social media blast to promote it, just for you. Annie nodded and opened the front door of the reporter's car and stepped out, then the reporter gave her a wave and drove off to head back to the newspaper. Annie watched the car drive away and didn't question her decision to tell the reporter everything. If there was one person she needed to tell all of the details to, it was a reporter. They had resources to check on things that normal people just didn't have access to or knew how to access. Annie walked over to the steps of the museum and walked up them, then she wondered if she should bother walking around to look for her son and his girlfriend, or if she should just ask the security guard if they had seen them. She chose walk, because she wanted a bit more time to ease her mind about all of the times during the week that she and Kelly had been out and around the town and could have run into Brad and his friends at any time. Damn that police officer. Annie thought and reined in her anger. I really do hope I never see him again, because I'll be arrested for assault. She smiled at the thought of seeing the man's smug face change to surprise as she punched and kicked him. Then she sobered up and knew she would be in serious trouble if she ever did do something like that. Annie walked around and didn't really look at any of the displays as she searched for Arnold and Kelly. Detective Tanner kept her mouth quiet as she sat in the police chief's office. She knew there was going to be a problem when he hadn't said what he wanted to talk about when he called her at her desk, and now she knew why. He berated her for not finishing the paperwork on the Strickland case and for getting him in trouble over it. The chief didn't like that he didn't know what was going on inside his own precinct, and he made sure that she didn't like it either. You get that release invoice to the morgue immediately. Not in an hour. Not later today. Immediately. Chief Morris said when he was done berating her. If I had known you've been sitting on that body all this time, I would have brought the hammer down on you a long time ago. That's why I didn't tell you. Detective Tanner thought. I'm seriously debating giving you administrative leave over your recent behavior. Chief Morris said, and that got her attention. Sir, there's something fishy with that family. Detective Tanner said. Especially the son. Every family is fishy, Detective. Chief Morris said. My own son enjoys dressing like a 60s gangster every damn weekend and can't stop imitating them and all of the ridiculous things they say. Detective Tanner was surprised to hear this, and the chief saw her reaction. Everyone has someone in their family that's a little odd, Detective. Good luck finding a family that doesn't. The chief said. So, get back to your desk and sort out this mess. If you even think of floundering on this, I'm calling the morgue in 15 minutes to see if they sent the body to the funeral parlor yet. Detective Tanner let out a sigh, because he had guessed what she was going to do before she did it. There's a reason I became police chief. Chief Morris said as if he could read her thoughts. Sir, I'll get right on it. Detective Tanner said in defeat and stood up, then she opened the door and stepped out of the office. Officer Holman. She said to the police officer waiting to go in. Detective Tanner. Officer Holman said and stepped into the office. When the door shut, it made no difference, because nearly everyone in the building heard their discussion. Detective Tanner walked back to her desk and quickly wrote out the release. Rather than have someone bring it to the medical examiner, she folded it up and brought it to the man in person. Ah, Detective. The medical examiner said. To what do I owe the pleasure? Detective Tanner didn't say anything and just handed him the release paper for Gerald Strickland's body. Finally. The medical examiner said. I'm not going to ask why it took you so long, since I know how your mind works now. You don't know how my mind works. Detective Tanner said. You wanted time to investigate the family and see what dirt you could dig up on them, just to see if you could tie them into the accident somehow. He said, and she couldn't help but look surprised. I've been on this job for a long time and I've seen a lot of people come through here, both alive and dead. If you don't start being careful about who you investigate, you'll be looking into everyone's background and you'll have no time to investigate the people that need to be investigated. Detective Tanner didn't say anything in response. Yes, my opinion is worth about as much as a day-old cup of coffee. The medical examiner said and smiled. It's cold and bitter and it won't get any better the longer it sits. Detective Tanner opened her mouth to say how you can reheat the coffee to make it good again, then sighed. The medical examiner chuckled as she turned and walked away, and then his phone rang. I delivered it just in time. Detective Tanner thought and left the morgue. Kelly had just finished telling Arnold about the taxidermy industry when Annie found them at the wildlife display. Hi. How did the interrogation go? Annie couldn't help but smile, because Kelly always made her smile somehow. I'm pretty grilled on this side. She said and pointed to her right side. The reporter had to go and didn't flip me over to finish the other side. Kelly laughed at her pun. I hope she gets the story out there as soon as possible. I just hope it doesn't give Brad and his friends any ideas. Annie said. Me, too, especially since we don't know the hours they're working or where they are. Annie nodded. How's the tour going? It's just about done. Kelly said, her face a little red, because that was what had interrupted their little adventure in the Valley of the Kings exhibit. She turned to look at the big furry bear that she had told Arnold that he couldn't touch, because her thought had made her blush even more. Arnold had been exploring her valley quite well at the time. It's almost lunchtime, so why don't we go grab a bite to eat? Annie asked. Sure. Kelly said. Arnold, let's go. Arnold nodded and the three of them left the display and went down the stairs, then went outside and to the car in the parking lot. They drove around a little as they talked about a good place to stop, and Arnold pointed. Oh, that's a good place. Annie said. We ate there after we went to the bank that time. Arnold nodded and they parked and went inside. They found a free table easily, since it was before the lunch rush, and the place was only just starting to get crowded. The food was great. Annie told Kelly. It was the best hamburger I've had in a while. I haven't had a good hamburger in forever. Kelly said as the waitress came over to their table. She wore an old-style apron over a nice blouse and a pair of black dress pants. Hi, there. I'm Lainey and I'll be your waitress today. She said and handed them menus. What can I get you to drink while you decide what you want to eat? We've already decided. Annie said with a smile. 2 hamburger platters with gravy on everything and a hot turkey sandwich special with no veggies or stuffing. I want the veggies and stuffing. Arnold said to her surprise. Oh. Change that to just a hot turkey sandwich special. Annie corrected. Lainey nodded and took out her notepad and wrote it down. And to drink? Root beers all around. Kelly said. We really should get diet soda, but we're splurging today. You make it sound like we never eat out. Annie chuckled and looked at the waitress. No ice, please. You got it. Lainey said. I'll be right back. She walked over to the main counter and handed the order to the cook and prepared the drinks. She served them and came right back to the counter to wait, because she had already served everyone else and the next order was coming right up for another table. Ugh, why did I want to work today? Amanda asked as she came out of the back. It's my day off. You get paid time and a half and the tips are a lot better. Lainey said. Oh yeah, that's why. Amanda said and they both laughed. Order up. Joe said and handed over 2 large platters of food. Thanks. Lainey said and delivered them to one of her tables. Is it much longer for that fish dish? Amanda asked. We have to make sure it stops twitching before we serve it. Joe said with a grin. Amanda rolled her eyes. Just hurry up. Fish dish. Fish dish. Boy, that sounds funny. Joe said and started humming and he put another double load of French fries into the deep fryer, then he flipped the 3 hamburgers on the grill. Lainey came back over and looked at what Joe had going. I'll do up the hot turkey for you. You're a doll. Joe said and shook the fries, then poked the 3 floating breaded fish pieces in the other fryer. Ah, just about done. How can you tell? Lainey asked. Experience, time, and it doesn't bob as much when it soaks up enough of the grease. Joe said and flipped them over to see they were a nice golden brown all the way around. There we go. He said and scooped up the fish with a wire mesh on a handle, rolled them around on a paper towel to soak up the excess grease, then grabbed a plate and added them to it without touching them. He pulled up the double load of fries from the grease and they were done, so he poured a generous helping onto the plate and added the garnish, small coleslaw, and tartar sauce, then handed it to Amanda without saying, "Order up." Thanks. Amanda said and quickly delivered the meal to one of her tables. She came back to wait for the next one and saw Joe finish assembling 2 large hamburger platters and the hot turkey sandwich. Something in her mind nagged at her at the sight and she couldn't place it. Joe smothered the platters in gravy and nodded to Lainey. Amanda, give me a hand with the 3rd platter. Lainey said and picked up the 2 hamburger platters and Amanda grabbed the hot turkey sandwich platter. They walked over to the table and Lainey served the 2 women on one side of the table and she served the man on the other side, and froze when he looked up at her. She would recognize those piercing eyes and that blonde buzz cut anywhere. It's my fun sex guy. Amanda thought in complete surprise. Oh. Hi. Amanda said, awkwardly. I haven't seen you in a while. Both Annie and Kelly had surprised faces. You remember us? Annie asked. We only ate here once and it was busy. Amanda let out a quick laugh and came up with the perfect lie. You both packed away your food so fast that I didn't get to ask if you wanted dessert. Annie had to laugh at that. That was so true. She pat her currently flat belly. I abused this poor thing quite a lot that day. You ate all of this in one sitting? Kelly asked and motioned to the huge hamburger platter. I told you it was good. Annie said. Order up. Joe yelled from the kitchen. Oops. You folks enjoy your food and I'll be back to check on you later. Lainey said and practically dragged Amanda away from the table and back to the counter. Amanda, what the hell was that about? I can't say. Amanda said and took the hamburger platter and delivered it. When she came back, Lainey glared at her. She sighed and motioned to the small hallway off to the side, then more people came into the restaurant. They got back to work and took the people's orders, served them drinks, then the two of them walked off to the side for a bit of privacy. Josie was working that day, and Amanda started and told Lainey about what happened that day. Lainey stood there and couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was impossible that Amanda would do anything like that at work, not even on a dare or with the guy she was seeing. She would also never cheat on her boyfriend with a complete stranger. Good God, Amanda. Lainey said with a sigh. I see that accusing look. Amanda said. I didn't start dating Jason until 2 weeks later. Oh, that's a relief. I knew you weren't a two-timer. Lainey said. But, still, did you really? Yeah. Amanda said, her face a little red. It's not one of my proudest moments. At least you didn't go down on him. Lainey said. Only because he had to leave. Amanda admitted. Wait, what? I wanted to thank him for, well, it was fun. Really fun. Are you crazy? He could have anything and he could have passed it on to you. Amanda's face went a little redder. He wore a condom. You know that's not 100% effective. Lainey said. I thought you were more responsible than this. I am, really. When I heard the term, I just had to see what he meant. Amanda said. Oh boy, did he show me what fun sex was. Lainey shook her head. Does Jason know what you did? Hell, no. Amanda said. It happened before we started dating and neither of us has asked what we did with anyone else before that. You're lucky, because I don't know if he would want to date you if he knew you did things like that. It was one time. Never before and never after. Amanda said in her defense. Order up. Joe said. Don't tell anyone else about this. Amanda said, almost in a plea. If I'd known what it was, I wouldn't have asked you about it in the first place. Lainey said and they walked over to the counter. I don't want this information in my head. She said and took the 2 plates of food and walked over to one of her tables and delivered them and Amanda took the other 2 and delivered them. You're right, Annie. This hamburger is the best. Kelly said and finished it off. We have to tell my mom and dad about this place. Annie nodded. It gets crowded at meal times, though. Everywhere does. Kelly said and picked at her remaining French fries that were only half eaten. I can't finish these. We can get a doggy bag, I think. Annie said. No, I doubt I'll eat it later. Kelly chuckled. Or eat at all for the rest of the day. I hear you. Annie said and pat her slightly bulged tummy. At least I didn't wolf it down this time. Barely. Kelly laughed. I saw you fighting your instincts. Annie snorted a laugh and the waitress came over to them with an empty tray. How is everything? Lainey asked and put the tray down on the table. It was great. Annie said and Lainey piled the platters onto each other on the tray. Are you interested in dessert? Lainey asked before she picked up the glasses. Interested? Yes. Able to eat it? No. Annie said. I think we're done for today. Lainey nodded and carefully picked up the tray filled with dirty dishes. I'll be right back with the check. She left the table and carried the dirty dishes into the back and dropped them off, then went to the register and did up the check. Psst, Lainey. Amanda whispered. Ask him what his name is. Huh? Lainey looked at her in confusion. Hold on a second. You don't even know his name and you did that with him? Amanda's face flushed completely red this time. I tried to ask and he evaded the question. Maybe he didn't want you to know his name for a reason. Lainey said. If the blonde is his mother, then the girl has to be his girlfriend. Yeah, I guess she is. If it was a one-time fling, why do you want to know his name? Lainey asked. It's over and done with, right? Amanda opened her mouth to say yes, then she closed it because she wasn't sure if it was. It's done with, right? Lainey asked, more pointedly. Amanda sighed. Yes, I guess it is. Lainey turned and stood right in front of her. Get your head on straight, girl. She cautioned her. No matter how fun it was, you can't be doing things like that. Not at work. Amanda opened her mouth to speak. Or anywhere else. Lainey said. Okay. Amanda said. Never mind. Don't ask him his name. It's not worth the hassle. You're darn right it's not. Lainey said and walked over to the table and held out the check. Here you go. Annie looked at it and counted out the right amount, then added a bit more for the appropriate sized tip. Thank you. Lainey said and pocketed the money. You folks have a great day. You, too. Annie said and she, Kelly and Arnold stood up just as the restaurant door opened and three people wearing big yellow coats with a large red X on the front and back came in. Oh, no. Kelly whispered and stepped around the waitress to take Arnold's hand. Arnold, please don't do or say anything to them. Unfortunately, Kelly had made a mistake. It wasn't Arnold that needed to be told to remain calm. You bastards. Annie yelled and every single person in the restaurant stopped what they were doing and turned to look at her, including Brad, Kevin, and their supervisor. How can you walk around like nothing happened when I lost nearly everything in my house because of you? Oh, shit. Kevin whispered. The supervisor stepped around her two charges and put herself between them and the irate woman. Ma'am, please calm down. She said and put her hands up in a stop gesture. I lost all of my clothes, most of my son's clothes, my husband's clothes, the wedding dress I was saving, all of the furniture, the floors and walls in the living room and hallway, and even all of the pictures from my life which included my dead husband that I just lost. Annie spat at them. I have nothing left. No baby pictures of my son. No family photos. Nothing. She yelled and her tears started to flow. All you got for destroying the history of my family is community service, when you should be in jail for causing the loss of priceless things that can never be replaced. Ma'am, please. The supervisor said half-heartedly, because she understood the woman's loss. She would be devastated if she lost everything in her life, too. Mom, I love you. Arnold said and kissed her cheek, because that was all he could reach. Annie let out a sob and everyone in the restaurant felt very bad for her. Do you even care how afraid I've been that you were going to come back and finish the job? That you were going to come after my son again to finish what you started? No one spoke and a lot of accusing stares went to Brad and Kevin. Let's get out of here. Kelly said into the silence. Despite the great food, I don't think we'll be coming here anymore if they serve people like them. Kelly took Annie's hand and Arnold let her out of the hug, then the three of them walked by Brad, Kevin, and the supervisor as they left the restaurant. Oh, my God. Lainey whispered. That was unbelievable. Joe said from the kitchen. That was my fun sex guy. Amanda whispered back. He handled that like a real man, didn't he? Lainey gave her a look that said maybe she wasn't crazy for accepting the blonde buzzcut's offer of sex. Oh, damn. They're sitting at one of my tables. Amanda said and looked at Lainey. Hey, do you mind taking them? I'll owe you big time. Lainey sighed. Fine. I'll take over table 6 for you while they're here. Amanda said as a couple came in and sat at the table, then both waitresses went back to work. Lainey took Brad's, Kevin's, and the woman's order and went back to the counter. Joe, even though it's tempting, don't spit in their food. I'd never deface my good food like that. Joe said and grabbed 2 of the hamburger buns and rubbed them under his sweaty armpits. Lainey held in her laugh as Joe hummed a little tune and made the hamburger platters for the 2 guys, and Lainey quickly did up the large garden salad for the woman. Annie and Kelly sat in the front seat of the car and Arnold sat in the back. They didn't drive anywhere while Annie held onto the steering wheel and leaned against it and tried her best to calm down. Kelly slowly rubbed her back and would do it for as long as she needed to. Annie took in a huge breath and let it out. I can't believe I just did that. Neither can the entire restaurant. Kelly said. It's not a joke. Annie said. I'm not laughing. Kelly said. Everyone heard what you said and nearly all of them gave Brad and Kevin the stink eye. The what? Annie turned her head to look at her. This. Kelly said and squished half of her face up and closed that eye and widened the other eye. Annie let out a chuckle at the sight. Kelly. They all looked at them with anger and annoyance. Kelly said as she let her face go back to normal. No one went back to eating while you talked, Annie. No one. They all listened to what you said and they all know what those guys did was wrong. She kept rubbing Annie's back. They also know that Brad and Kevin really don't care about what they did. They got away with it and that's all that matters. I shouldn't have embarrassed myself like that, or you, for that matter. Annie said. When I saw them, I couldn't stay quiet about it. I know. Kelly said. I was so concerned over Arnold doing exactly what you did that I missed the fact that you would want to do that, too. Annie took another deep breath and sighed. I'll probably have a restraining order issued against me for it. Annie. Kelly exclaimed. We should do that. Do what? We should get restraining orders against Brad and his friends. Kelly said. We've been nervous about it since we learned they were out, so let's go get some peace of mind. I don't know how to do that. Annie said. Me either. Kelly said and then smiled. Isn't the internet a wonderful thing? She asked and quickly looked up how to file a restraining order. It says we just have to go down to the courthouse and explain the situation, then they'll take care of the details. At least it's not the police station. Annie said and had to smile. That's the spirit. Kelly said. Do you feel up to driving? Annie nodded and started the car, then drove them partway across the town and went to the courthouse. There was a lot of available parking, so they didn't have any trouble there and went inside. They talked to the clerk and she was more than happy to help them file a restraining order. Then she heard how many defendants there were. Are you serious? You want 6 of them on the same protective order? She asked, astonished. They assaulted my house, did thousands of dollars in damages, and should have been sent to jail. Annie said. They are doing community service and I just ran into 2 of them at a restaurant. It wasn't pretty. Kelly said. I didn't think of recording a video, though. It wouldn't have happened if I had a restraining order against them. Annie said. They have to stay far away from me, right? The minimum is 500 feet and depending on the severity of the crime. Let me tell you about it. Kelly said and filled the clerk in on what happened. She was surprised, to say the least, and she was also surprised that every one of them had gotten off, especially the ringleader. It's unusual to have them on the same order, but they seem to work in a group to do stupid stuff. The clerk said and quickly filled out the order and added the names that Kelly gave her. She looked through her records to confirm it was them by their ages, then found their home addresses. I'll set it at 1,000 feet and I'll have the servers get copies out to the subjects immediately. Can we have a copy? Kelly asked. Of course. If any more of them come near you, you flash this at them and they have to leave you alone. If they don't, you call the police and report them. They'll be escorted away. If they make a fuss, they'll be arrested for violating it. How much for? The emergency one is free and lasts for about a month. The clerk said with a smile. If you want to make it permanent, you'll have to set a court date with the judge, then it'll be about $400 for the filing fee, that they will usually waive in most domestic violence cases. Annie looked at Kelly and then at the clerk. I think we'll try the emergency one for the month. If anything else happens, then we'll make an appointment for the permanent one. The clerk nodded and grabbed a piece of paper from the printer. Sign that, please. Annie, Kelly, and Arnold signed it, then she took it back and made several copies. There we go. The clerk said and gave them 3. It's filed and is in effect. You can rest assured that if anything does happen, it will be taken care of. Thank you very much. Annie said in relief, and they each took a copy and folded it up and put it in a pocket. Then she realized something. Wait, Kelly said that I needed a judge's approval for a restraining order. The clerk smiled. You're looking at her. Annie and Kelly opened their mouths in surprise. We thought. They started at the same time. The clerk chuckled. Surprise. The normal clerk is home with her kids today. Wow. Kelly said, kind of in awe. It's really nice of you to do this. I'm glad you appreciate it. She said. I hope this brings you a little peace of mind. It already has. Annie said. Thank you again. I'm always glad to help. The clerk said. Have a good day. Annie, Arnold, and Kelly left the courthouse and hopped into the car. I wouldn't mind taking a walk in the park, except that we'll meet a couple of the guys there. Kelly said, and Annie nodded. If they're cleaning up around the town, there's a definite chance that at least 2 of them are at the park. Annie sighed. Maybe we should just head back to Catherine's. Arnold? What do you think? Is there anywhere else you want to go? Kelly asked. The library. Arnold said. The library it is. Annie said without asking why he wanted to go. To her, the fact that he asked was enough for her to take him there. She drove the car a street over and parked near the library. We probably could have walked. Kelly smiled as they got out of the car and she held a hand out to Arnold. He took it and she held on tightly. We were in the car anyway. Annie said, and the 3 of them walked inside and over to the counter. Arnold, tell the nice lady here what you're looking for. I want a book on common laws and the penalties for breaking them. Arnold said. Annie took in a sharp breath. Arnold, why? Brad and his friends committed felonies. I don't know what those are and I want to know why they aren't in jail. Let me take a quick look. The librarian said and typed on the computer. She had the typical librarian look with dark and slightly grayish hair done up in a bun on the back of her head, large glasses with the string around the ear pieces to hold them on her neck when she took the glasses off, an old-fashioned yellow blouse with a thinly knitted wine-colored sweater coat over top of it, and a plain skirt. All right, I have 3 of them. They are on the shelf in H07, right side, section 10. The librarian said. I can lead you there if you haven't been here before. Please. Annie said, and the librarian came out from behind her desk and led them across the library and up the stairs to a section that was raised up about 10 feet from the main floor. This is the law section. The librarian said and went to the right shelf and grabbed the 3 books. Common Laws and You. She said and handed the first book to Arnold. It's a basic code listing and how they apply to normal citizens. She handed him the second book. Codes and Codexes. This one is a bit more lawyerish in the wording and describes all of the bylaws and conditions that violate them, so it's a bit of heavy reading. Kelly stared at the 3-inch thick book. The librarian handed Arnold the third book. This one is an actual lawyer textbook. It lists specific cases and references to all of the major and minor local laws. It's a very difficult read if you don't know the legalese needed. She pointed to the first book. There's a glossary of terms in the back of that one that will be invaluable if you decide to read the third book. Thank you, Annie said. The librarian gave them a big smile. The index is your friend. If you're looking for anything specific, check that first and see if there's anything close to what you're looking for, rather than looking through all of it to see what's there. She said. So, will you be reading them here or checking them out? We don't have a library card. Kelly said, and Annie gave her a surprised look. I was too busy studying to get one. Those books are going to take time to read through, so you can help yourself and use one of the tables, or we can go back to the front desk and I'll fill out a card for you. The librarian said. You can take the books home for 2 weeks if you do. Arnold? Are we staying or going? Annie asked. Staying. Arnold said. I won't need the books for that long. Then I look forward to seeing you here again. The librarian said, because she assumed they would need to come back later to continue reading. The tables are back this way. They followed her back towards the front of the library and she took a turn into a large area behind several shelves of books. If you need anything else, I'll be at the front desk. The librarian said and walked away. Annie, do you want to look around and see what else they have? Here. Kelly asked. Arnold's going to be busy for a while. Annie shrugged. There wasn't really anything she was interested in, but she didn't want to just sit there doing nothing either. We'll be back in a while, Arnold. Okay. Arnold sat down and opened the common laws book and read the index. He quickly found the damaging government property and private property laws and flipped to them. He read them and discovered that private property damage didn't have the same penalties as the government property one. Of course, now that he knew the laws, he opened the second book and used the index to look up the actual laws and how they were written and the conditions for breaking them. The librarian had been right. It was a much heavier read than the easy book. Arnold had to refer to the glossary in the back of the first book a few times to understand the wording. When he was done, he sat back and thought about what it meant that Brad and his friends hadn't been sent to prison for damaging government property. Arnold couldn't understand how they were granted community service, so he went back to the first book and read it all the way through. When he finished it, he sat back and let the information percolate in his head like the professor said and to let the information settle before reading any more. He knew the laws that could be broken to allow Brad and his friends to get out of the charges. Bribery and coercion were the two main ones, and both had a monetary and an influence factor. Favors could be traded instead of money, and unless you knew who was involved and what they did, none of them could be prosecuted. Arnold looked up the actual laws and nodded. You couldn't even accuse them of wrongdoing, not without evidence, because that was a crime called slander. Arnold closed the books and didn't bother with the third book. After a quick read-through of the index, there wasn't anything close to what was going on. There were 2 instances of bribery, but they were crimes in and of themselves and not factors in other cases. Arnold? Are you done? Kelly asked and Arnold looked at her. She had a small stack of books in front of her and Annie had her head on her arms and looked to be asleep. I need to ask the librarian something. Arnold said and stood up. Kelly nodded and kept reading the book she had in front of her. Arnold walked around the shelves of books and went to the front desk. Hello, there. The librarian said. Are you having trouble reading the? I can't find a reference to a case where bribery and coercion were used to get a defendant a lesser charge from the prosecutor. Arnold said. Would it be in anything you have here? The librarian blinked her eyes for a moment. You are asking if we have a book on legal system corruption. Is that what it's called? Arnold asked and she nodded. Then yes. Do you have a book on that? Not in a book based in real life. The librarian said. There are a lot of books written by fiction writers that have it in them. That won't help me here, will it? Arnold asked. No. As soon as you mention it's from a fiction story, it's almost automatically disregarded as not factual, even if it is. The librarian said. I'm sorry. Arnold stood there and stared at her for several moments. Is there anything else I can help you with? The librarian asked, a little unnerved at the scrutiny. Do you have any books on sex? Arnold asked. The librarian frowned. If you're looking for adult magazines, they sell those dirty things down at the corner newsstand behind the counter. Do they give descriptions on how to have sex? Arnold asked. Well, no. They are just full of dirty pictures. Then that's not what I want. Arnold said. I want to learn more about having sex. Excuse me. I only know 3 positions. One where we face each other laying down, one where she's facing away standing up, and one where I hold her legs together and she's on her back. Arnold said. The biology book I read said that if you don't have a variety of skills, you can't keep your mate happy for long. The librarian's mouth opened in surprise and she wasn't sure what to say. I need a book that can tell me about more positions and how to do them. Arnold said. Do you have a book like that? The librarian swallowed audibly. I may have something in the back. She said. We don't have a lot of things like that out for public consumption. May I see it? Arnold asked. I can't bring anything like that out here and it might take a while to find the book. The librarian said. Why don't you come to the back with me and we can look for it together? My girlfriend and my mother are waiting for me. Arnold said. The librarian let out a sigh. Maybe you can join me in the back the next time you come here. She said. I won't be able to look for the book until then. Okay. Arnold said and walked away. Just my luck. The librarian thought. I finally had someone who had the guts to ask me about sex and he has both his girlfriend and his mother with him. Arnold went back to the table and picked up the 3 law books. Kelly saw him and closed her book and picked up the rest of them, then they went back to the shelves and put the books back where they got them. They went back to the table and Kelly gently woke Annie up. Annie, let's go back to my mom's place. Kelly said. Huh? What? Annie lifted her head from her crossed arms on the table and looked at Kelly. Oh. You're ready to go? Kelly and Arnold nodded, so she took a few moments to wake herself up, then the 3 of them left the library and drove back to Catherine's house. They arrived just in time for supper and the 5 of them had a nice quiet meal. After that, Kenneth disappeared into his den, Catherine went to do some laundry, and Annie was exhausted both mentally and emotionally and went to lay down in the spare room. That left Kelly and Arnold all alone for a while, and unlike what her parents thought was going to happen, Kelly did up the couch for Arnold to sleep on and then the 2 of them sat there and watched television as they cuddled. No groping, no making out, and no stripping off their clothes. They did kiss occasionally and kept it on a low level, just in case Kelly's parents did sneak in to look at them. Her parents did check on them several times, as Kelly suspected they would, and they didn't see anything except their daughter and her boyfriend spending time together. After a couple of hours, Kelly let out a huge yawn. I think I better go to bed. Kelly said and gave Arnold a kiss. Good night. Good night. Arnold said and watched Kelly leave the room. He picked up his backpack and took out a t-shirt and a pair of jogging pants and changed right there in the living room, then he climbed under the blanket on the couch and closed his eyes. Catherine had heard Kelly say goodnight and ducked out of sight as her daughter passed, then Catherine went back to the living room to check on Arnold. She stopped and covered her mouth before she gasped as she watched Arnold strip off in the middle of the living room. She thought about walking away, then realized if she moved, he would be sure to see her. She stayed and watched him get changed, then when he climbed under the blanket on the couch and closed his eyes, she made a hasty retreat and went back to her bedroom. "Did anything happen?" Kenneth asked as she came into the room. "Kelly's gone to bed and Arnold's sleeping on the couch," Catherine said, and conveniently left out seeing Arnold in just his underwear. She was pretty sure her husband would freak out if she told him that. She walked over to the bed and took off her robe and climbed into bed beside her husband and didn't say anything else. She eventually fell asleep and she successfully ignored the odd feelings she had about seeing the bulge in Arnold's underwear. Kenneth fell asleep, full of relief that his daughter was going to be safe for the night and wouldn't be ravaged by her boyfriend. Arnold waited until midnight before he sat up on the couch. He took out his cell phone and the restraining order and brought up a map. He checked all 6 addresses on the map and only 2 of them were close enough for him to reach without taking some kind of transport, like the bus. If he timed it right, he could be at the closest address and back long before anyone woke up at Kelly's house. He memorized the map and put the cell phone down beside the couch. He had read the manual and it said the phone had a GPS tracker in it, which meant he had to leave it. The house was completely silent, so he grabbed his backpack and walked to the front door, put on his sneakers, then walked through the house to the kitchen. He went out through the large double doors there, then walked along the back of the house until he was in the side yard. Arnold was out of view of all the windows, so he sprinted across the open area and then climbed over the fence. He ran along it to the street and then followed the map in his head across several streets until he came to the first address. Unfortunately, it wasn't Brad's. If Arnold cared about such things, he would have been disappointed that it wasn't Brad, because it was ridiculously easy to get to the guy that lived there. Jake sat in his backyard and took a drink of beer. He absolutely hated that he wasn't allowed to drink in the house and he took his frustration out on the beer in his hand. He had worked hard all day cleaning up the damned park of all the garbage that everyone threw all over the place. He was especially glad they had work gloves and tongs to pick things up, because he had lost count of how many condoms he had found. He shivered at the thought of getting an STD from handling some random guy's condom and took another drink of beer, then he felt a hard blow on the side of his head and then nothing. Arnold grabbed the beer bottle with his rubber-gloved hand before it fell and stopped it from smashing on the concrete patio. He put the rock he used back beside the house and walked over to the unconscious man. The sharp blow to the guy's temple would kill him, because it had severed the middle meningeal artery and he was bleeding out into his head. All it would take was a little time. Arnold looked around in the thick grass for something to trip over, and saw a good-sized stick. When he picked it up, he found that it was the handle of a rake. He placed it near the concrete slab, picked up the not yet dead body, and laid it out appropriately near the slab. He made sure that his temple would be hit in the same spot, then dropped the body onto the corner. Jake let out a gurgle and struggled to breathe, because his neck was at a bit of an angle. Arnold put the beer back into his hand, making sure to tip it over as if it spilled when Jake fell, then he put the rake's handle between Jake's feet. Arnold checked around and made sure that his own sneaker prints weren't left anywhere in the dirt under the thick grass, then he snuck away into the night. Arnold tried to go to the next closest address and found that it was in complete darkness. He thought about trying to approach and check the windows to see if they were locked, then stopped when he saw a dog laying in the middle of the backyard. Arnold dug into one of the pockets in his backpack and took out a couple of small doggy treats and tossed one into the yard near the dog. The dog perked up at the sight and couldn't resist checking it out, then gobbled it down without even tasting it. Arnold held out another and waved it back and forth, and the dog came right over to him. He gave him the treat and the dog chewed it this time and sat down to wait for another. Arnold took one out and lured the dog away from the backyard and into the nearby woods. Catherine woke up groggily and looked at the time. It was just after 4 o'clock in the morning and she eased out from under the blanket and sat up, held in her sigh so that she wouldn't wake up her husband, and slowly walked to the bathroom. She did her business and came back out, then had an errant thought. She had to check and see where Arnold was. She walked over to her bedroom door and opened it just enough to slip out, then crept down the hallway and into the main part of the house. She made her way to the living room and when she peered around the edge of the door frame, she caught her breath. Arnold wasn't there. Catherine quickly walked back through the house, still careful to not make any noise, and she went to her daughter's room. She very slowly opened her bedroom door and peeked inside, then sighed in relief. Only one body-sized lump was under the blanket. She closed the door and started to go back to her own bedroom, then she frowned. Hold on. If he's not on the couch and he's not in Kelly's room, then where is he? Catherine asked herself as she stopped walking. Several things went through her mind and then the obvious answer came to her. She walked over to the spare room and gently eased open the door to peer inside. She saw the tops of 2 blonde heads sticking out of the blanket and she put a hand over her heart. The poor dears. She thought. They've lost almost everything in their lives except each other. Mollified that Arnold wasn't trying to sneak into Kelly's room, Catherine carefully closed the spare room's door and went back to her bedroom. She climbed into bed and closed her eyes to try and squeeze in a few more hours of sleep before she had to wake up in the morning to make her husband breakfast. What she didn't know was that Arnold had just come in through the back door in the kitchen and had seen her checking the living room for him. He quickly went to the spare room to his mother and slipped into her bed and under the blanket. He had spent too much time in the woods with the dog and didn't get the chance to try and get into the second house. Annie had been grateful when Arnold had climbed into the bed in the spare bedroom. After everything that had happened that day, having a comforting embrace felt very nice. She also thought that the couch was a bit too lumpy for him to get a good night's sleep and she had welcomed Arnold with a hug and a quick kiss, then faced away from him. Arnold slid in close and put his arm around her. Annie drifted off to sleep, both happy and content. Kelly thought she had heard her door open and looked to see if Arnold was trying to sneak in to see her. She would have to tell him not to do that while at the house, so she slid out from under her blanket and looked out into the hallway. She saw her mother's back and frowned. What was she doing? Kelly asked herself and waited until her mother went into the bedroom. She quickly walked through the house to check on Arnold, now that she was up. When she reached the living room, she saw that the couch was empty. Mom thought he came looking for me. She thought and went back to her bedroom, then had the same thought her mother had. Hold on. If he's not on the couch and he's not in my room, then where is he? Kelly came up with the solution immediately and peeked into the spare room. She saw the tops of 2 blonde heads and she smiled. She eased the door shut and went back to her room and climbed into bed. Of all the places he could have snuck into, that was the safest choice. Kelly thought and went back to sleep. She was glad that none of them had to be up first thing in the morning and she was only a little disappointed that Arnold hadn't tried to sneak into her bed. The next morning, Catherine had breakfast made and ready for her husband. He ate quickly and gave her a kiss goodbye, and tried to leave the house in a hurry. He had another early golf date with the boss and he was the caddy this time, so if he wasn't there before the boss and had the clubs ready, there would be hell to pay. Have fun. Catherine said as she grabbed his arm at the last second before he stepped out the door. You do realize I'm sucking up to the boss, right? Kenneth asked and his wife laughed. Knock him dead, then. Catherine said and he gave her another kiss and left. It took another hour or so for 3 sleepy heads to shuffle into the kitchen. What are you doing up? You look exhausted. You look chipper. Annie said and plunked down onto one of the chairs at the kitchen table. Catherine gave Arnold and then Kelly a knowing look as they sat down at the table. I'm just a little happier this morning. Annie saw the look and chuckled. No, he snuck into my bed last night, not Kelly's. She said, then she laughed. Good Lord, that sounded so dirty. She shook her head. We only cuddled and went to sleep. That must have been nice. Kelly said. Oh, it was. Annie said and yawned. It ended too soon, too. Have a couple of toast and go back to bed for a few more hours, so you can enjoy your time together. Catherine said. The toast should trick your body into thinking you ate a meal and your brain will want to sleep it off. That. Kelly yawned, too. Sounds like a good idea. The three of them had 2 toast each. Kelly had strawberry jam on hers, and the three of them left the kitchen with the same shuffling gait they came in with. Catherine waited until they were out of earshot before she laughed at their disheveled states. You take him this time. Annie said and pointed Arnold to Kelly's room. Annie. Your mom thought he was in your room, so I'm sure she knows you're going to cuddle now. Kelly remembered waking up last night and seeing her mother checking on her. So, you better do it now before she changes her mind. Annie said with a smile, then yawned again. I really am still tired. She said and went into the spare room and closed the door. Kelly looked at Arnold. Arnold, do you? Arnold, what are you thinking right now? Kelly asked. You are the most beautiful creature in this world. Arnold said, repeating the line he had used before the prom. Kelly smiled and lifted the blanket, then she climbed into the bed and slid in close to him. Arnold, you can touch them if you want. Arnold? Kelly said, hesitantly. Kelly easily went back to sleep as she cuddled the man she loved and slept soundly. Jake's mother woke up and groaned as she sat up. Her husband was dead asleep beside her and she didn't bother trying to wake him up. It was a Sunday and he was going to sleep in for as long as he possibly could. She didn't begrudge him that, either. He worked hard all week for their family, just so they could afford to send their son to college in the fall. Their daughter was only a little jealous of that, since in a couple of years, she would be graduating high school and it would be her turn to go to college. Just like her brother, she had higher than average grades and they both had a good future ahead of them. The best part was that Jake's friend Brad was attending a different college and they were finally going to get him away from that bad influence. Both she and her husband had been very relieved that the prosecutor was lenient for the charges against them and Jake only had to do community service and not jail time. It wouldn't impact his academic record much and it even gave him a bit more of a favorable look to help the community like he was. It was forced, but still, he worked hard and the supervisor's reports were exemplary. Jake's mother turned off the alarm before it went off and left her bedroom. She knocked on Jake's door. I don't care how long you were outside drinking. You get your ass up right this minute. Your supervisor is going to be here in an hour. There was no answer, so she sighed and went to the kitchen. She decided to let him sleep for another 10 minutes while she made a quick breakfast. Scrambled eggs were the easiest thing, next to cereal and milk, so she quickly cracked open a few eggs into a bowl and added a bit of milk. She stirred it haphazardly and tossed it right into the cold pan and turned on the stove. She checked the time and nodded, then went back to Jake's room. She didn't knock this time and just went right inside. I said to get your ass up. She stopped talking when she saw the bed was messed up and her son wasn't in it. Ugh. She grunted and left his room and walked over to the living room and opened the patio door. You better not have stayed out here drinking all goddamned night. She said loudly and stepped out onto the concrete patio, then she froze still at what she saw. Jake? She asked, barely above a whisper. Jake? She said normally, then she yelled. Jake? When Jake didn't move or even twitch at the sound of her voice, she screamed. Kelly woke up when her cell phone rang. She immediately knew where she was, what she was doing and looked at the clock on her nightstand. That was a quick 3 hours. She thought and reached for her cell phone. Hello? She paused. Oh. Yes, this is Annie Strickland's contact number. She waited and listened. That's wonderful. Thank you for letting us know. I'll tell Annie right away. Uh-huh. Yes. All right. Goodbye. She put her phone down. That was the reporter. They approved the story and she spread it all over social media to advertise it. Mom should be happy. Arnold said. We need to get up. Kelly sighed. I like being like this. Your breast is soft and warm. Arnold said, and Kelly put her hand on his hand. Your hand is firm and gentle, and I love you for that. Kelly said. But, you're right. We need to get up and tell Annie the good news. Arnold let her breast go and Kelly let his hand go, then they got up and dressed. They left her bedroom and went to the spare room. Annie was sound asleep and they climbed into the bed with her. It was a tight fit with the three of them on it. Arnold? Annie asked and opened her eyes slightly. And Kelly? Kelly said with a smile. Bed's too small. Annie said and reached up, then pulled the both of them down into tight hugs. Now it's okay. Kelly laughed and tried to hug her back. Arnold's chest was in the way, so she half-hugged him and hugged Annie with her other arm. Arnold did the same and the three of them shared a group hug. You must have a good reason for coming in here and squishing me. Annie said and let them go. Kelly held out her phone. The reporter just called. They approved the story. Annie said and Kelly nodded. Annie chuckled. I knew it was a good idea to tell her everything. I was wondering why your interview took so long. Kelly said. It was more like me just telling my story and her writing it all down. Annie said. I think she only asked 2 questions. Kelly chuckled this time. You always give good and informative lectures. Ha. Annie said. Okay, off the bed. I need to change. I can't roam around the house in my sleep clothes all day. Why not? You do that at home. Kelly said and stood up. Dad's gone for the day again, too. Annie gave her a look of surprise, then she laughed. All right, those are good points. The three of them left the spare room and went to the kitchen to have an actual breakfast. They debated waiting a couple of hours to get some food for lunch, then decided it was better to eat now and delay lunch instead. Skipping meals was not a good idea. They sat down and ate and watched Catherine puttering around in the garden, then went to the living room to watch some television. Kelly folded up Arnold's blanket and the three of them sat down. You take the head this time. Annie said and moved down on the couch. What do you, oh? Kelly looked down at Arnold as he laid on his back and rested his head on her lap and his feet on Annie's lap. I can't tell if we're spoiling you or if you're spoiling us by doing this. Don't overthink it. Just rub his chest and relax. Annie said with a smile. Kelly smiled back and did just that. Her cell phone beeped at her about an hour later and she checked it. Oh, my God. What is it? Annie asked. That anonymous video I posted about Arnold getting assaulted in the game by Brad and his friends just reached 1 million views. Kelly said, astonished. It what? Annie looked at her in shock. Did you just say that 1 million people saw it? Not quite. It's been seen 1 million times. Kelly corrected. That could be 1 million people viewing it once, 100,000 people viewing it 10 times, or... Okay. I get it. Annie said with a laugh. It must have just as many responses. There's a lot, that's for sure. Kelly said and scrolled down a little on her phone. Just over 22,000. Excuse me? You didn't just say 22,000, did you? Annie asked and Kelly nodded. That's ridiculous. Kelly chuckled. If you thought that's impressive, then you're going to be blown away by this. She said. There's about 1,200 requests for Arnold to play the game. What? Annie yelled. Kelly laughed as she scrolled through them. I don't see any of Brad's handles in here, or Kevin's. I think these are actual people that want him to play. She looked at a few. A few are offering bribes, party invites, and some just want to meet you. She shook her head. I never thought you'd become popular by someone trying to kill you. Arnold gave her a small smile and she leaned down to give him a quick kiss. Kelly browsed through the comments and then gasped. Arnold. You've got a developer's invite. A what? Arnold asked. You've become a game representative and people have been coming back to it in droves because of you. Kelly said as she read the message. They said you'll get exclusive content if you agree in access to any new projects that they, oh, my God. She looked at Arnold with wide eyes. You can be a beta tester. I'm not saying you should accept. Kelly said and reined in her excitement. I'm just saying it's a wonderful option and you should consider accepting. You want me to? Arnold said. I would if I were you. Kelly said before she could stop herself from influencing his decision. No, don't do what I say. Just because I would accept it without thinking about it, you should take your time and look at what the deal contains before making your decision. Arnold. Annie said from the other side of the couch. If you don't accept it, she'll be upset. Annie. Kelly blushed. Arnold sat up and looked at his mother, then turned his head and looked at Kelly. I'll accept it when I go back to the dorm tonight. You don't have to. Kelly said and tried to deny that she really wanted him to take it. Even if having access to new products is every gamer's dream. You'd be better off trying to tell him you don't want to take his place. Annie said with a laugh. Kelly's blush deepened and she sighed. I'm sorry. It's just. We know. Annie said and looked at her son. Arnold, kiss her to stop her from denying what she wants. Arnold put his hand behind Kelly's head and started kissing her. Kelly couldn't resist it when he kissed her like that and her arms went around his neck and she kissed him back enthusiastically. Annie sat there and honestly wondered how long they would go at it with her right there, so she sat back on the couch and waited. And waited. And waited some more. Annie was actually surprised as the makeout session just kept going and going. She covered her mouth to stop her laugh, but it wasn't enough and she snorted loudly and then laughed. That broke the spell Kelly was under and she broke the kiss. Her face was still a little red from embarrassment. I'm sorry, I couldn't stop my laugh. Annie said and pat Arnold's leg. You would keep going and going, wouldn't you? Yes. Arnold said. Why would I stop? Annie looked at Kelly's face and saw the blush. I think we need a little talk about. She stopped talking and smiled. You know what? Go ahead and keep making Kelly happy. Okay. Arnold said and started kissing her again. Annie did her best to not laugh this time, and she occasionally looked at the clock and the time as it passed. I wonder what the world record for kissing is. She asked herself and didn't interrupt them this time. Kelly's lips must be getting sore by now. She thought as she checked the time again and stopped her laugh. This is getting a bit ridiculous. Phew. Catherine exclaimed when she came in the back door. I hate weeds and love gardening. What a puzzle to solve. Kelly gasped into Arnold's mouth and broke the kiss. And my mom. She whispered. I knew my loud announcement would get someone's attention. Catherine said and walked over to the living room to see Arnold sitting between his mother and Kelly. I see you're behaving yourself with Arnold's mother here. Like I need the supervision. Kelly said. In fact. I think we can have a nice late lunch. Annie said and interrupted her. How about pizza? If I don't have to cook, I'm all for it. Catherine said with a smile. I'd like to add a sub sandwich for Kenneth to eat later. That's a good idea. Annie said. I'll add another for Arnold to take back to college with him. She said and picked up Arnold's cell phone from the table and called. Hi, there. I'd like to order. An ambulance and a police car were at Jake's house earlier that morning and the emergency medical technicians had checked Jake over. They weren't allowed to pronounce him dead until they arrived at the hospital, so they packed up their things and loaded the body onto the stretcher and drove the ambulance away. Jake's parents and sister were devastated that such a stupid accident could take someone's life. The police took a few pictures and asked a couple of questions. It was just a formality, though. Accidental deaths barely got any investigation time, especially considering the kid's criminal background and excessive drinking habits, so the police left and Jake's family were left emotionally drained and a family member short. They sat around the backyard all morning, as if they expected Jake to show up and say it was all a practical joke. They didn't notice the pizza delivery truck as it passed by. "This is so good." Kelly almost moaned as she bit into the pizza. "Why does fast food taste so good?" "It's so you buy it, of course," Catherine said and took a bite of pizza as well. Mm. Annie made a similar sound when she bit into it, then laughed. "We sound like we're enjoying this a little too much." Catherine and Kelly laughed, too. "I think it's because we're not used to it," Catherine said. "Once a month or so, we'll order out as a treat for ourselves." Annie nodded. "Us, too." She took another bite. "It's just rare enough that it's always just as good the next time." Kelly nodded. "If we have it too much, it might lose its mystique. Plus, if we always have great tasting food, it's not so great tasting anymore because you have nothing to compare it to," Catherine said with a straight face, then she laughed. "Imagine if that was true. Life would suck if chocolate didn't always taste good," Kelly said, and the three of them laughed. Arnold ate like he always did, mechanically, and set his pace to theirs so that he didn't eat too fast or too slow. "We don't have a lot of time left before Arnold has to catch the bus," Annie said. "Over 6 hours is lots of time," Catherine said. "I think she meant he has to leave and we won't be seeing him again until next week, assuming he doesn't have to work on Sunday, then it'll be the next week," Kelly said, and she reached out to take Arnold's hand. She stopped before she did, because her fingers were greasy from the pizza. Arnold moved his hand that last little bit and took her hand anyway. Kelly smiled and leaned over to give him a quick greasy kiss on the lips. "I'm trying to eat here," Catherine said, and Kelly gave her mother a look that said she was next. "No. Don't even think about." Kelly darted forward and planted a greasy kiss on her mother's cheek. "You." Catherine moved away and tried to wipe at her face with the back of her hand and just spread it around. Kelly. "Sorry, Mom. You asked for it," Kelly said with a grin. "I did not," Catherine said and then sighed. "Okay, maybe I did." They finished eating and cleaned up, saved the remaining pieces for later, then they had to figure out what to do for the next 6 hours. They had already used up a bit of time watching television, they couldn't go out to the park for a walk because of the community service workers, and none of them were interested in going to the movies. Even just going for a drive could potentially put them in violation of the restraining order they had received the day before. "You're still friends with Heather, aren't you? Why not go over to her place and use the pool?" Catherine asked. Kelly opened her mouth to tell her that was a horrible idea, and the reasons why, when Arnold spoke. "According to our friends, Heather wasn't really our friend. She was only pretending to be nice to get something out of us," Arnold said. "Kelly helped Heather study and I had sex with her. She didn't need us around after that." "Arnold." Kelly took his hand. "I don't think she was quite that heartless." Arnold shrugged. "She pushed us both aside before we started dating," he said. "Why else would she do that if she wasn't our friend?" Kelly didn't have an answer for him, because she did feel ostracized when Heather pushed her aside to date Brad, and look how that turned out. She did wonder where Heather was now, though. "Oh. Why don't you call your new friends, then? Annie asked. You can see what they're up to today. On such short notice? Kelly asked and took out her cell phone. I don't think they can get together this quickly. You should have messaged them yesterday. Catherine said. We were a little busy yesterday. Kelly said and typed up a message and sent it. Everyone waited for several minutes and then her phone beeped. Ha! They said they'd love to get together and hang out. They'll be here to pick us up in an hour. There you go. Catherine said. You should have enough time to get ready by then. Kelly nodded and she and Arnold split up. She went to her room to get ready and he went to the spare room. They both had showers and changed into appropriate clothing, jeans and baggy t-shirts, then went to the front door to wait. A few minutes later, a horn honked and Arnold opened the door. Keep an eye on the time. Annie said. 5 hours for the bus and Arnold needs to come back here to get his things. We know. Kelly said and waved to her mother and Annie. See you later. Arnold and Kelly jogged over to the cars that had parked. We've got room for you in car number 2. One of the guys said. Got it. Kelly said and they both barely squeezed into the back seat with 2 people they didn't know. You guys are crazy. 2 laughed from the front seat between the driver and another girl. We only had 2 cars and all these people, and none of us were asking our parents for a ride. Her boyfriend laughed. No way that was happening. He said. It's okay, though. We're taking the back streets and as long as it looks like we're belted in, we'll be fine. Arnold slipped the closest seat belt over his shoulder and held it there, and the guy nodded. Right on, Arnold. He said. Let's go. Both cars pulled away to take them to wherever their destination was. Kelly had been too surprised by the offer of hanging out that she hadn't even asked where they were going. Brad and Kevin finished up their work for the day and Kevin took off before the supervisor could offer him a ride. He doesn't know, does he? The woman asked Brad. Are you kidding? He'd kill me if he knew I was getting my rocks off by doing the boss. Brad laughed, because she was an even mix of the demure older woman and a woman that didn't take shit from anyone. At first he had thought he was lowering his standards to be with her, but, after being with her for a while and getting to know her, he knew the truth. She was the one to lower her standards for him and she didn't care what anyone else thought about it. Not even him. He opened the passenger door for her. The truck was parked on a small service road, just off the main road, and it faced away from traffic. The woman took off her yellow coat and tossed it in the back and climbed inside and across the bench seat, then pulled down her work pants and the thong she wore. She stuck her head out the driver's side window and shook her ass at him. They were so busy having fun that they didn't see the 2 very overloaded cars pass by. You're gonna love this place. 2 said from the front seat. We come here all the time. Yeah, not a lot of other places to go locally, you know. Her boyfriend said and they pulled off the road onto the shoulder, then down another access road and slowed to almost a crawl. They keep the place clear for the power line workers and it's the perfect place for some tunes and some booze. Kelly was nervous when she heard that. I don't know. She said. That sounds shady. 2 laughed. It's okay. We don't always drink. Plus, we need to drive home afterwards. Well. We play music and dance, mostly. 2 said. It really is a great relief after a long week. You said it, baby. Her boyfriend said and kissed her. I really miss seeing you every day at school. It just doesn't feel right when I don't see your smile, you know. 2 blushed and gave Kelly and Arnold an embarrassed look. Being a little sappy is okay. Just don't overdo it. Kelly said. I might start to fake gag. 2's boyfriend laughed. Oh, come on. That was a great line. He said and pulled over behind the other car. Everyone out. They all piled out of the two cars and more people than what should be possible appeared in the clearing. Someone produced a little music player and hooked it to the front car and rolled down the windows. Some great music started playing and then both trunks were opened and there were beers, sodas, wine coolers, packs of wieners, bags of marshmallows, and a dozen large bags of different flavor potato chips. "It's like a party on wheels," Kelly said loudly and nearly everyone laughed. "You know it," one said as she came over to Kelly and gave her a hug. "It's nice to see you again," she said and then gave Arnold a hug, too. "We're really glad you called. We missed you guys. We've been a little busy," Kelly said. "Come over here and tell us all about it," Two said and tucked a couple cans of soda under one arm and took Kelly's hand with the other. "We'll let the guys set everything up." By everything, she meant a plastic table for the food and a small propane cooker that was set in the middle of the clearing. It was out of sight of the road, and the guys pulled over several large logs to sit on. "Thanks," Two said to the guys and sat, handed Kelly a can of soda, and pat the log. Kelly chuckled and sat, then 1 and 3 sat on either side of them and 2 other girls sat across from them. "What's been going on?" one asked. "Well, a lot of things," Kelly said and started to tell them everything that was going on. This got the attention of the guys and they started to crowd around to listen, except for one of them. He had slipped away into the increasing darkness as the sun set. Arnold had seen the truck they passed down the road and had recognized it. He wasn't sure if anyone was going to be there, but he wasn't going to miss an opportunity to check when it presented itself. Brad was having quite a good time. Unlike what a lot of people think. Sex sometimes isn't a quick thing. It takes work, time, and in some cases, extra stimulation. This time, going at it in their work truck in public was the little bit of spice that both the woman supervisor and Brad needed. The excitement of being outside and the chance of being caught made them a little more frantic to get each other off. They were being quite loud about it, too. That's it, a little more, oh, God. Brad's supervisor panted. "One more second. Oh." Brad felt her go and her body gripped him hard and he went, too. It was a safe day for her, so he hadn't bothered with a condom, and they both felt him spill out and into her and added to the thrill. The supervisor relaxed and let out a satisfied sigh, then Brad saw a flash of silver and heard a dull thud. "What was that?" Brad whispered and she didn't respond. "Hey, did you hear that? I like shovels," a male voice said from out of the darkness. "They are great tools with so many uses." Brad froze at the sound of someone's voice being that close. "Who's there?" he asked and listened intently. He could make out some faint music coming from somewhere and couldn't see anything. He reached for the truck's keys and they weren't in the ignition. "Damn it," he thought and started to search through the supervisor's pockets. "Hey, give me a hand," he whispered to the supervisor and she didn't move. "Okay," the male voice said and suddenly the driver's side door opened. Since both the supervisor and Brad were leaning heavily against it, it flung open and they tumbled out of the truck's front seat and fell to the ground in a heap. Brad's face was mashed into the grass because his hands were in the supervisor's pockets and he couldn't stop his fall. He tried to cry out in pain and only tasted dirt. Did you know that the human eye is the most vulnerable organ in the human body? Any damage to it can cause intense pain and disorientation. The voice said. "I always thought the testicles did that." There was another flash of silver in front of his face and Brad felt the most intense pain between his legs that he ever felt. With his pants down to his knees, he was completely exposed and the impact of a shovel nearly blinded him with pain. Even getting stepped on there didn't hurt that bad. When he opened his teary eyes, they had adjusted somewhat to the darkness and thanks to the light from inside the truck's cab, he saw a tall silhouette as it stood above him with the work shovel from the truck. "Hey Arnold." Brad said when he recognized the blonde buzzcut. What are you doing? He asked through the pain. Committing a crime. Arnold said and knelt and put the shovel down. I never knew that all the things I've done all these years were crimes. What are you talking about? Brad asked. He hoped if he kept him talking, he could escape or call for help or something. Call. He thought, and despite the pain, started to dig through his own pockets for his cell phone. It was pretty obvious that was what he was doing, even with the supervisor's dead weight half covering him, and every movement sent shocking pain through his genitals. Taking things that weren't mine. Killing animals. Lying to those in authority about it. Arnold said and reached out to cover Brad's mouth with a rubber glove-covered hand. Driving without a license. Killing my father. Killing Jake. Brad froze still at his words. Killing you. Arnold said and used his free hand to hold a long screwdriver just over Brad's face. Brad hollered no, and it came out as a muffled shout. Then Arnold slowly pushed the screwdriver down into the eye socket beside the eye. Brad tried to lift his arms and they were caught in his clothing and under the supervisor. You killed my girlfriend. Arnold said, and Brad's other eye flicked at him. We played the game to train to fight you, and she was slaughtered and eaten. I didn't like that. He said. I had to wait to come back here to kill you for that, then you hurt my mother. Ma. Brad's response was muffled. You made my mom cry. Arnold said and pushed the screwdriver through Brad's eye socket and into his brain. Brad didn't struggle much and only twitched from having his brain penetrated through the frontal lobe. Arnold grabbed the supervisor's hand and put it around the screwdriver's handle, then he quickly and carefully moved it up and down to mulch Brad's eye and stab his brain over and over. He was extremely careful to not splash blood on himself or on his gloved hand. Arnold checked the woman's pulse and she was still alive, so he propped her up just enough to sit up, put the shovel in Brad's hand, and swung it at the side of her head. A shovel was quite the versatile tool, and the supervisor slumped against the still open driver's side door and slid to the ground with her hand still on the screwdriver embedded into Brad's skull. His work done, Arnold thought about shutting the door of the truck and stopping the light, then he peered in to look at it. He saw several switches and pushed them, and the light got brighter, then dimmed, then blinked, then turned off. He nodded and looked around where he stepped to see that the ground was hard and packed down, and he could see some of his partial sneaker prints in places. He quickly swiped his foot over the spots, making sure to not leave a trace, then left the scene as quickly as he had arrived. Kelly, that. I can't believe. Tu shook her head. How are you not crying all the time over this? Kelly took a deep breath and smiled. It's because of Arnold. She said. He's been a rock for me and his mother through all of this. I honestly don't know what I would do without him. Did you hear that, Arnold? Three said and looked at the crowd of people around them. Kelly really needs you. She said, and then she didn't see him. Arnold? She asked. Hey, where's Arnold? A few people around them turned their heads to see if he was at the table of food or at the car trunks getting a drink. I don't see him. Someone said. What? Kelly stood up and looked around. Arnold. Arnold. She yelled. Where are you? Right here. Arnold said and stepped out of the woods and pulled up his zipper. A few people laughed and a few of the girls blushed. I'm sorry for yelling. Kelly said. I hope we didn't rush you. I did my best to finish as fast as possible. Arnold said. I don't like leaving you alone for too long. Aw. That's so sweet. One said. He can't even pee without thinking about you. Thanks for that visual. Two said and everyone laughed. I think that's enough pee talk. Her boyfriend said. Want to dance? Sure. Two said and the two of them moved off towards the front car and started to dance. Let's all do it. One said and took her boyfriend's hand, despite his shaking head, and dragged him over. A few people laughed and then everyone was dancing around. Arnold? Do you? Kelly started to say and he stepped close to her and took her into his arms. He held her like he did at prom and they swayed back and forth and occasionally kissed. Some people had beers, some had sodas, and they all had a good time for several hours. They danced, some sang, and a few had snuck off to be alone and to have some fun. Kelly had been very tempted to try that herself. She settled for a heavy makeout session and even asked Arnold to massage her breast. He did it discreetly and no one knew that he had his hand under her baggy t-shirt, and she was grateful that she had worn it, because she really liked that he was so gentle. Unfortunately, their time for fun eventually came to an end. I need to go, Arnold said when he broke the kiss and Kelly nodded. They walked through the spread-out people who were all doing different things and found Tu and her boyfriend. They were leaning against the second car and Tu's boyfriend was nibbling on her ear to make her laugh. Can we get a drive home? Kelly asked. Arnold needs to get his stuff and catch the bus to go back to the college. Sure. Tu said. At least we won't feel like sardines this time. Kelly chuckled. I don't think it would have been so bad if we knew everyone beforehand. It's a neat introduction when you get used to it. Tu laughed. Hey. Someone's sitting on my hand. Hi, I'm Sarah. Her boyfriend laughed. Hop in. He said and pointed to the car and looked into the scattered crowd. We'll be right back. A few people waved and the four of them got in the car. A short drive later, Kelly and Arnold were dropped off at Kelly's place and they went inside. Hey, you two. Annie said from the living room. Did you have some fun? A little. Kelly said, her face slightly red. Arnold, gather your things. Arnold went to the spare room to get his backpack and came back to the living room and picked up his phone. His mother stood up and gave him a tight hug. Call during the week and let us know if you can make it back next week. Annie said. We'll be back in the house by then, too. Okay. Arnold said and Kelly hugged him next. Take care of yourself and text if you need anything. Kelly said and gave him a kiss. I love you. I love you, too. Arnold said and looked at his mother. Mom, I love you. I love you too, sweetie. Annie said and gave him a quick peck on the lips. Now get walking. The bus won't wait, even if the driver somehow knows you need the ride. Arnold nodded and gave her a hug, hugged Kelly, then left the house. You can come out of hiding now. Annie said towards the kitchen and Catherine came out. I wasn't hiding, I just didn't want a chance getting another kiss. Catherine said. Uh-huh. Annie smiled. Was it so terrible that you're avoiding it instead of just telling him that he doesn't have to kiss you to thank you? Catherine's face flushed red as she blushed. I didn't realize I could ask him to stop. Both Kelly and Annie had to laugh at that. The last bus of the day came to a stop and picked up a passenger who flashed a bus pass at the driver and then passed it over the scanner. The young man sat in the front seat and rode in silence for the entire bus ride back to where he had come from the day before. The driver didn't ask what he was doing, since it was the college run and it was late Sunday night. He assumed the man was returning to classes after spending the weekend at home and there was no point in asking him about it. Arnold stepped off of the bus just over 2 hours later and walked all the way back to the campus. When he entered the dorm building, the lobby was completely empty except for one person. Doris was behind her desk and stood. Arnold. She said, barely above a whisper. Welcome back. Arnold walked over to her with purpose and slid his arms around her and gave her a deep and passionate kiss for several seconds. Thank you. Doris' heart was beating fast and her face was flushed with blood, even though most people couldn't tell. That was a great thank you kiss. She thought. You should go upstairs and get to bed. You have an early day tomorrow. Doris opened her mouth to give him an emphatic yes, then she smiled. Dear boy, I would like nothing more, but I need to go home and get to bed as well. She said. I only stayed here long enough to see you. Arnold gave her a smile and she caught her breath. Thank you, he said and gave her another kiss. Sweet baby Jesus, you tempt me so. Doris thought and kissed him back, then she watched him walk over to the stairs and run up them out of sight. Arnold appeared at the top of the stairs on the 4th floor and none of the room doors were open. It was pretty late, so he crept down the hallway and didn't make any noise. He entered his dorm room and closed the door, took off his backpack and went over to his computer, then turned it on. He sat down and clicked the link that led to the video of him being assaulted in the game. He quickly scrolled through the messages to the one Kelly had shown him and found the link to the developer's invite. Arnold copied it and started the launching program for Fortune's Favor and added the link. He loaded the player modification screen and not the full game, as the message said, and the link verified his player ID. Once that was done, he received a pop-up that told him about their user agreement to not share the content he was about to see, and then had an accept button and a decline button. He chose accept like Kelly wanted. Only a few moments later, one of the developers received a legitimate pop-up from their offer. Quite a lot of people had tried to fake it and steal the developer's invitation, especially since it had been posted publicly, and the developers did it that way to see what kind of talent they could scout. It was kind of pre-interview test that let them know who could hack into their games. They would be contacted about different things later. Aha! We caught you with the first offer. The guy chuckled. I'm glad that we didn't have to negotiate to get you on board. He typed up several things, loaded the preset beta player package and a bonus equipment chest for Fortune's Favor, then clicked send. You should like the level boosters for all of our games. You're going to need them with all the competition you've brought back to the game for us. Arnold received the confirmation message and the beta package started to download, so he let it go and changed for bed. He checked the alarm to make sure it was going to go off at the right time, then climbed into bed. He laid there and looked over at Kelly's empty bed, then he turned around and looked at the computer. As the progress bar filled and he kept his word to Kelly, Arnold drifted off to sleep. Arnold woke up the next morning when the alarm went off, had a healthy bowl of cereal with milk and a small glass of orange juice, then had a quick shower and dressed for work. When he opened his dorm room door, he was met with the same half-naked scene as always and also with a lot of warm greetings of good morning and hello. He walked the hallway and returned the greetings and made sure to make eye contact with everyone. They all felt like he was making time for them and that was quite a feat for a hallway full of women, and Arnold gave them a little wave as the elevator doors closed. He rode it down to the ground floor and stepped out into the partially crowded lobby. Doris gave him a wave and he walked over. Good morning, she said and glanced around, then leaned over her desk. I'll need your help tonight if you're not busy. I'm not busy, Arnold said and then he whispered. I'll kiss you later. Doris nodded and watched him walk away. What's he going to help you with? A young woman nearby asked. He's just moving some things for me in the back room, Doris said and smiled brightly. It's so nice to have a strong man that can help with those kinds of things. The young woman chuckled. I hear that, she said, then decided to try and shock the older woman. Of course, he'd be doing a bit more than just moving things if he was with me. My word. Doris fake gasped and the young woman laughed. Arnold stepped out of the dorm building and walked the 8 minutes to work. Once there, it was the biology degree course that had to be set up and not regular students, so it took more than just his efforts to set things up. Amy, Cicely, and the other lab workers helped. Most of them weren't hung over, so they had it done before the professor came into the lab. Excellent work, everyone, Professor Hamel-Krenslav said, and they took their positions and the class came in for their full morning lab and everyone got to work. Ah! The supervisor groaned as she woke up around noon. Her head was splitting and she didn't remember falling asleep, and she wondered why her bed felt so hard. She used a hand to rub her face and felt wetness, then sighed. She hated it when she drooled in her sleep. She reached out to hit her alarm before it went off and heard a squelching sound. Huh. She opened her eyes and one was tinted red and she felt a stinging sensation. Ow. 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 She said and tried to wipe at her face again, which only pushed even more sticky blood into her eye and made her cry. What is this stuff? She asked herself and tried to look at it with her good eye. What? No, it's not today's a safe day. The supervisor tried to sit up and hit her back on the bottom of the truck's door. She grunted at the odd sensation and rolled over to look at whatever it was over her bed that she hit, then she caught her breath when her single eye saw something her brain couldn't make sense of. There was no way she would bring Brad back to her place. Brad, what the hell are you doing here? She asked and reached for his shoulder, then shook him. Brad. Wake up. She said and shook him harder. When his head rolled to the side and she saw the state of his face, she screamed. And screamed. And screamed some more. A man and his wife were jogging along the road and heard the hysterical screams. They exchanged looks for several moments, then the woman sighed and nodded. They diverted their path and ran down an access road just off the main road and almost comically skidded to a stop when they saw the grisly scene of two people with their pants pulled down and one was dead and the other was screaming. Oh, God. The woman said and took out her cell phone. Please don't be busy. Don't be busy. She said and dialed 911. It started ringing and she sighed in relief when the operator picked up. When lunchtime arrived, Arnold went with the lab workers and he greeted the woman behind the counter when he picked up his meal and Angela at the register when he paid for it. He ate lunch and Cicely asked him what he did during the weekend. Arnold told her about the confrontation at the restaurant and then getting a restraining order, sleeping in, then having a party with his friends. Well, at least you enjoyed yourself at some point, right? Cicely asked. Arnold gave her a smile, which caught everyone's attention, and then he finished eating. See you tomorrow. He said and went back to work. Good Lord, did you see that smile? Maxine asked. He lit up the whole room. Oh, I saw. Cicely said and smiled herself. I'm thinking he might have gotten something extra at that party. I hope he had protection. Amy said. Otherwise, he'll be getting some surprising news soon. Cicely laughed. I'm sure he's got a box of condoms stashed somewhere. They're no good if you never use them. Maxine said. Then again, you know how it feels. Stop right there. Amy said and held a hand up. You better be practicing safe sex or I'll disown you. Ma'am. Ma'am. The EMT tried to calm the hysterical woman down. Ma'am, please. I know it's horrific, but we need to check you over. The supervisor wasn't listening and just couldn't bring herself to stop crying or to stop hugging her legs to her chest. She was in complete denial. It definitely started in the truck, then she managed to get the door open. The second police officer said Ad pointed. By the looks of it, the guy hit his face pretty hard here in the dirt and grass. The rest is a damn mess. The first police officer said. A fight between a shovel and a screwdriver isn't fair at all. The second police officer shook his head. We better call this in and get the guys out here. We've already trampled all over the scene, especially the EMTs. The first police officer said. I'll call the station and you can mark the spots with the known shoe prints, for what little good it'll do. I'm on it. The second police officer said and started to do just that, and the first police officer went to the squad car to call it in. The response was immediate, since there hadn't been an incident like it in a while. When he was told who was assigned to the case, he silently cursed. He left the squad car and went back over to his partner. You can stop doing that. The first police officer said, then leaned in close and whispered. Detective Anal has the case. Oh, shit. The second police officer whispered back. I don't feel like getting yelled at today. I think we're getting yelled at no matter what we do. She's been better since her talk to the chief, but this is going to set her off like a nuclear warhead. Yeah, and that's going to suck for that poor woman. The second police officer said and indicated the supervisor. She had been picked up by the EMTs and put on a stretcher, and they marked on her medical sheet to perform a rape kit, despite the obvious signs that she had been forced to have sex. They covered her and one of the EMTs gave her a mild sedative to calm her down. We're good to go. The EMT said, and they carefully rolled the stretcher around the work truck and towards the ambulance. She's definitely not going to like a witness leaving the scene before she gets to talk to her. The second officer commented. The first police officer let out a chuckle. She's hysterical and incoherent after killing her assailant and she hasn't spoken yet. He said as the ambulance drove away. Although, it might be a good idea to record her badgering the victim and prove that she's doing more harm than good with her modern tactics. They both nodded and then winced as they heard the squeal of tires and then the pings of gravel on the underside of a car as an unmarked car sped towards them and skidded to a stop just behind their squad car. Detective Tanner stepped out of her car and walked over to them. Tell me everything you know. Both officers did their best to describe the scene when they had arrived, about the hysterical woman and the sexual assault, and about how the EMTs had to cart her away and give her a sedative. God damn it. Detective Tanner spat. Our best witness is incapacitated and we need the details only she knows as soon as possible. She said and stood there and thought about what to do now. This is a crime scene, so get your tape out and block this off, then get me piles of evidence bags. She said. I'm tempted to get the medical examiner out here to let him gather the forensics evidence personally. That's not going to happen, because he hates you. Both police officers thought and didn't say it. Where's the camera guy? Detective Tanner asked and a tiny car pulled into the service road and parked behind her car. A skinny man stepped out and grabbed his camera bag and walked over to them. Tell me what you want. The man said and took out the very expensive professional camera. Focus on the body for now, then spread out to the truck, then do the surrounding brush. You got it. He said and stepped by her, then they heard the whirring and clicking. It took both real and digital photos, in case a detail was lost from either one. When he was close enough to see the face on the body, he cursed loudly. What is it? Detective Tanner asked and turned to look at the camera guy. It's trouble, is what it is. The camera guy said and waved at the body. Don't you know who this is? We haven't searched him for ID yet, so no. Detective Tanner said. I was waiting for accurate photos before disturbing the scene any more than it already was. The two police officers exchanged looks. At least she didn't yell at us this time. It's Darren Willoughby's son, Bradley. The camera guy said. What? Detective Tanner yelled and tromped over to the body and stepped all over the crime scene, which she would later regret, because the basic lesson she was taught was to never disturb the crime scene. She would also never know that she had stepped into the only footprint that Arnold had missed cleaning up near the body. Detective Tanner successfully stopped herself from turning the head towards her with bare hands and dug out a single rubber glove, then touched his chin and turned the head towards her. One of the eyes was gone and she ignored it to look at the face. She recognized it as the ringleader of the group that had assaulted the Strickland house. Why isn't he in jail? Detective Tanner asked, confused. He pleaded down to a misdemeanor and got off with community service. The camera guy said. Don't you read the newspaper? What newspaper? She asked and the camera guy went to his car and came back with a folded paper. Right on the front page was a casual group picture with Brad and his friends. They've been advertising the story all weekend. The camera guy said. It's not like it's a huge scandal or anything, but the Strickland family managed to get a restraining order against the whole group. What? That's not normal procedure. Detective Tanner said. The camera guy shrugged. That family's been through a lot, and it's all right there in black and white. He said. The husband dying, losing their savings, having their house ransacked, then finding out the little bastards got off. He looked down at the body. Well, most of them did. Detective Tanner stopped her gasp before it escaped. Take a lot of pictures. She said and stood. I'll let you get back to work. Thanks. The camera guy said and started taking more pictures. I bet the Stricklands will be pretty happy to hear this guy's not around to bother them anymore. More like relieved. Detective Tanner said and went back to her car. She had a bit of reading to do and some calls to make. Arnold received some personal instruction from the professor that afternoon and it helped refine his technique even more. Getting to use his skills on so many different kinds of specimens was invaluable for his education, and the professor asked him random questions about the things he had learned from the books and periodicals he had Arnold read. He was quite impressed at his mental retention. After everything you've learned so far, is there anything specific you want to learn next? Hamill asked his apprentice as they cleaned up their tools and their work area. I think I need to learn more about chemical formulas and their compositions. Arnold said. My high school had a good chemistry course, but this is college. I need a better understanding of it if I'm going to go further. Hamill nodded. Yes, I have to agree. The more you delve into the biology field, the more of a basis you need in the related fields. He said. I can introduce you to the chemistry professor and see what she recommends. I've met Professor Power. Arnold said. Oh. What did you think of her? Hamill asked, curious if he would find the woman as abrasive as everyone else. She's strict and Cicely doesn't like her. Arnold said. He did not say the nickname Cicely called her. Hamill chuckled. Well, they are like oil and water. They mix when necessary and usually separate as soon as possible. Arnold nodded and Hamill looked at the clock on the wall. The last class is about to end, so if you hurry, I'm sure you can catch her in Building B on the second floor in the chemistry lab. Hamill said. Yes, sir. Arnold said and left the biology lab at a fast walk, took the stairs and left the building. He walked a good distance across the campus and entered Building B just as the buzzer rang to end class for the day. He went up the stairs and weaved his way through the people milling about that were waiting for the elevator and walked over to the only open door. Arnold looked inside the lab and saw a very well-dressed woman as she stood over her desk and she flipped through several papers and marked them with a red pen. He had to step out of the way of several students as they left the lab and the professor was now all alone. He stepped into the room and shut the door. Professor Felicia Power saw the movement out of the corner of her eye and waved at him. Give me a few minutes before you bother me. I need to review these awful papers while I'm still in a bad mood. Arnold didn't say anything and stood there and waited. He had always been good at waiting for the right opportunity. Professor Felicia Power took almost 15 minutes to finish marking the papers. Arnold didn't realize, or care for that matter, that she was intentionally procrastinating so she could make him wait. It was one of the little triumphs that she awarded herself for dealing with ignoramuses. When Felicia felt that she had made the student wait long enough, she flipped over the small stack of papers to put them face down and then stood up straight to see who it was that wanted to waste her time after the proper class. Felicia took in a sharp breath when she saw Arnold in his business suit. Even though it was the end of the day, he was pretty much immaculate, since he was deft in his movements and kept the suit unwrinkled and clean. She also changed what she was going to say from her normal derisive comment. My apologies for making you wait. Felicia said. You know some things need to be handled immediately, or you lose your chance to do them properly. Arnold nodded and she gave him a rare smile. What can I help the biology department with today? Not the department. Arnold said. I would like to learn some more about chemistry. Arnold ignored both things. I passed high school chemistry with the highest marks in the school, he said, and her eyes widened slightly at his boast. I'm learning a lot about biology that I didn't know before, but my education in chemistry is lacking for what I need to understand some of the biological processes I've been exposed to. Felicia leaned her backside against the edge of her desk and she moved her hand down from playing with her vest buttons to smooth out a perceived wrinkle in her skirt and rubbed her thigh. Her movements were a little awkward, because she was trying to do it and watched his reaction at the same time. Yes, I suppose you would need a deeper background in hard chemistry, Felicia said, and his eyes never left hers. He's not looking at what I'm doing at all, she thought, a little perturbed. He has more willpower than I thought. Can you tell me some of the things that you are having trouble with? Arnold told her about the latest periodical that Professor Krenslav had loaned him and she nodded. Yes, I know that one, Felicia said, and changed tactics. She slowly unbuttoned her vest and opened it to show her nearly see-through chiffon blouse. Her black bra was clearly visible through the thin fabric and she took a deep breath and let it out. The chemical formulas they use are quite complicated, and they don't explain how they interact with each other. Arnold nodded. What do you recommend I do to help me understand the proper interactions? Felicia did her best to trace the edge of her bra through the fabric. Would you be surprised if I said that we would need some private lessons over several nights to get you up to the proper knowledge level? No, Arnold said. I usually do my extra studies at night to keep up with the biology students. Would you be willing to do anything to get me to help you? Felicia asked and plucked at her chiffon blouse in what she thought was a very blatant sexual advance. No, Arnold said, to her surprise. I can't have sex with you. Felicia didn't like the blatant rejection, despite her intention to only tease him. Close the blind on the window, she said, and Arnold did so. What would you do if I took my underwear off and propped my beautifully long leg up on my desk? I'd tell you that you look pretty, Arnold said. Pretty? Felicia asked, a little angrily. Just pretty? I would be exposing my natural beauty to you and that would be all you would say to describe it? What do you want me to say? Arnold asked, genuinely curious. That you feel privileged to see such beauty, Felicia said. That you want nothing more than to make love to me for as long as you can, she said as she let her indignation at being rejected overtake her original plan. You should be on your knees and beg me to let you feel such wonder, because it's so rare for it to be enjoyed like that. She glared at him for a moment, then she gasped and blushed at what she had just admitted. She turned her head to try and hide her embarrassment. Arnold walked over to her and took her hand. And no, I'm sorry. I took my teasing a little too far, Felicia said, and couldn't look at him. I only wanted to entice you and to make you uncomfortable, and all I managed was to do it to myself. Arnold stood there and just held her hand. He didn't try to grab her, hug her, or anything else. After a few minutes, Felicia's embarrassment faded somewhat and she let out a sigh. When she turned her head to look at him, his face was right there and she stared into his eyes. Arnold stared right back. I'm married, Felicia said. For some reason she felt like she needed to be completely honest. We've been separated for 6 months and it's really frustrating that he's already moved on and, she's so young, she said. I've been so angry over it, because he could leave me for some little tramp. It's infuriating, so I thought, what if I tried it, too? She let out a soft laugh. Of course, I picked the one young man that wouldn't find me attractive. Arnold reached up with his free hand and cupped the side of her face. I have a girlfriend and I can only have sex with her, he said, and his hand slid down her neck and inside her vest to caress the side of her breast through her bra. Felicia caught her breath at the gentle caress, then the hand went down to her waist and over her hip. She didn't say anything when Arnold partially knelt to put the hand under her skirt and stood back up, which pulled her skirt up to her hips. She kept her eyes locked onto his and he stared at her as his hand slid to the inside of her thigh. "I feel privileged to see such beauty," Arnold said without taking his eyes away from hers, and his hand touched her. "I would make love to you for as long as I could if I was allowed," he said, and rubbed her. "I would be on my knees and beg you to feel such wonder." "Oh, God," Felicia said. "I thought, you didn't like me, like everyone else." Felicia didn't hesitate and nodded, since he was already there and doing it anyway. It didn't take long, to her surprise, and they didn't break eye contact at all, even when she finished. In fact, it took her longer to calm down afterwards than it took to do it. "Tissues?" Arnold asked. "Desk. Top drawer," Felicia said, and was surprised that he knelt and cleaned her up, because she thought he was only going to wipe off his own fingers. She was doubly surprised when he slipped her underwear back into place for her and it wasn't bunched up or anything. "How often have you done this?" "With just my fingers." "4. Arnold said. "Wait, what?" Felicia looked at him in disbelief. "I usually use my tongue to help," Arnold said, and he saw her body twitch. "I need more tissues," Felicia said, and he gave her some. She wiped herself off and dabbed at her now wet panties. "Arnold, I hope you know that I'm not a woman that normally does things like this." "I do now," Arnold said, now that she told him. Felicia took a deep breath and pulled her skirt back into place. "You can't tell anyone that we did this." "I know," Arnold said. "People around here already hate me. If they knew I lured you into doing what you did." Felicia shook her head. "If you stay quiet about it, I'll do everything I can to get your chemistry knowledge up to college standards." "Higher," Arnold said, and she caught her breath. "Arnold, that could take." Felicia gave him a disbelieving look for several seconds, then she sighed. "I suppose I did start this, so I only have myself to blame for this situation," she said. "All right, Arnold." She took out her cell phone and gave him her number. "Call me when you want to have our first lesson." Arnold dialed her number and her cell phone rang. "Professor Power, I'd like to have our first lesson." "Very funny," Felicia said, and hung up the phone. "Grab the third book on the shelf there," she said, and pointed. "It's a difficult read for a normal student that has a lot of chemistry background, so for you it's going to take a while." The book wasn't very thick, so Arnold sat down at her desk and started reading. Felicia saw him settle down to read and was a bit too surprised that he was going to stay and read it to say anything. She had work to do anyway, so she went about it and cleaned up the lab properly and used all the proper procedures. She wasn't distracted by the handsome young man, until she saw him put the book back. "Yes, it's close to supper time," Felicia said, and took off her rubber gloves and tossed them in the trash. "You can come back to finish next time." "No," Arnold said, and took her hand and led her back over to the desk, then he sat her on it. "Arnold, what are you doing?" Felicia asked, then she clamped her mouth shut when he knelt and reached under her skirt and took off her underwear. In the next moment, he had one of her long legs propped up on the desk, just like she had said she would do if she was going to proposition him for sex, and her skirt rode up to the top of her thighs. Arnold stepped back and looked at her offering, and her face went completely red. Detective Tanner sat in her car and she couldn't believe what she had inadvertently discovered. Using the group photo in the paper as a reference, she made some discreet calls to check up on the others from the group. Kevin, William, Henry, and Michael were fine. William and Henry were currently being supervised as they worked along the highway on the other side of town. Kevin was at home, because the supervisor didn't come and pick him up, so he assumed he had the day off. Michael was at home for the same reason, except for one caveat. Jake was dead. He had been drinking the night before and had apparently fallen and hit his head. When his supervisor showed up to pick him up, he was met by an ambulance, a police car, and a grieving family. He called it in to the police station and said he couldn't work today after seeing such a tragedy. Detective Tanner couldn't help but see that they were being picked off, one by one. Because of the article in front of her, her thoughts immediately went to the Strickland family, since they were the ones to have suffered so much at the hands of this group of hoodlums. She remembered how shaken the mother had been at the sight of her husband's body, but Arnold, he didn't even flinch at the sight. She couldn't do anything right then, since she had a crime scene to process, so she put the newspaper down and stepped out of her vehicle. She didn't start gathering evidence to prove a case that was already solved, though. She was gathering evidence to see if she could place Arnold at the scene of the crime, and she did her level best to do just that. She knew that as soon as she was done there, she was going to have to visit the site of Jake's accident. She almost chuckled at the thought, because in her mind, that was going to be a murder scene, too. Arnold greeted the woman behind the counter and asked for a different meal, then greeted Angela as he paid for it. "Hey, are you busy tonight?" Angela asked as she handed him back his change. "Want to hang out?" "I'm sorry. I'm helping my dorm mother move some things around tonight," Arnold said. "What about tomorrow?" "I have another book from Professor Krenslav to read, and the next night I have a lesson with Professor Power in the chemistry lab." Angela gave him a fake smile to hide her disappointment. "You shouldn't work yourself so hard. I like work," Arnold said and sat down at a table alone, ate his food at a normal pace, then brought the things back to the counter and dropped them off. "See you tomorrow," the woman behind the counter said, and he waved to her as he left. Arnold went to his dorm building and stepped into the lobby. No one was there, he assumed because they were still eating supper in different places, and walked over to Doris' desk. Doris took a drink of water to wash down the mouthful of rice she had. "Hi, Arnold." Arnold walked around the desk and bent over to give her several kisses. "I'm eating," Doris said between kisses. "I just ate, too," Arnold said and kissed her again. The elevator dinged and Arnold broke the kiss and walked around the desk as the elevator doors opened. Two young women that were dressed fairly nicely came out and waved at Doris, then they left. 2 hours. Doris said. Arnold nodded and stepped into the elevator and went up to his floor. He saw only a few girls in the hallway and a lot of them were eating and talking. He didn't try to listen as he walked past and waved to those that noticed him. "Do you think he'll do it again?" one of the girls whispered. "We can hope," her roommate said, and they both stepped out into the hallway to watch. Sure enough, Arnold left his room door open, like all the others were, and he stripped off down to his underwear. "I'll never get tired of seeing that," Daisy said. "I'm so glad that he isn't shy." Someone giggled and that set a few of them off and they laughed, too. "You guys are horrible," Janet said. "Hey, you're looking, too," Crystal said from the next room. "I don't want to be the only one that's not," Janet said, and they all laughed. Arnold walked over to the door of his room and looked out at all of the women looking at him. "I'm going to take a shower now. Do you want me to shut the door?" A resounding chorus of "no" responded, so he walked back over to the laundry basket and took off his underwear and then went to his bathroom and took a shower. "I really, really hope his girlfriend doesn't come back for a while," someone whispered, and they all enjoyed the show. Arnold stepped out of the shower and dried off, then he walked over to his dresser to grab a pair of underwear. He put them on and picked up his cell phone and walked out of his room to lean against the wall by his door. It was then that he started to text Kelly about accepting the developer's invitation. "Who do you think he's texting?" someone whispered. "His girlfriend," the girl next to her said. "He has to keep reassuring her that he's not doing anything with a dorm full of women, right? But, he is doing something with us. He's giving us a good show. The same amount he's seen your ass in a thong," she said with a smile, and both of them laughed. They had started talking in whispers and had ended talking normally, so nearly everyone in the hall had heard their conversation and had to agree. Cicely sat on her living room couch with Amy on one side and Maxine on the other. The three of them read the newspaper, and it was amazing to get all of the details about the events that Arnold had only casually mentioned at lunch. "I feel so bad for his mother," Maxine said and shook her head. After her husband died and they paid off the house, it was trashed and she couldn't live there for nearly 3 weeks. She shook her head. Then losing everything on top of that. That poor woman must be crying her eyes out over this. Amy nodded her head. She had taken out her microbraids and left her hair all frizzy and normal. Arnold doesn't seem too torn up over it. Ha! Cicely barked a laugh. You know guys. They won't admit that they're hurting unless you drag it out of them one word at a time, and even then you almost have to trick them into it. Ain't that the truth? Maxine said and tapped a finger on the picture in the paper. How in the world did all of them get off with just community service? They're rich kids. Cicely said and flipped the page to read the details. Well, 3 of them, anyway. The rest are well-to-do middle-class families and aren't hurting for money. They must have struck some kind of deal with the parents or something. Amy reasoned. I mean, they would have to, right? Who wouldn't have them pay for the damages, or better yet, make them clean the mess up? Yeah. Cicely said and closed the paper. The reporter wouldn't expressly say something fishy was going on, but she sure implied it. Maxine chuckled. That's her job, isn't it? To make the story more interesting. Both Cicely and Amy laughed. It wasn't interesting enough? Amy asked. The description of the restaurant scene was so vivid that I thought I was there and had seen it myself. Cicely nodded. Arnold was a real man there. Oh. You didn't want him to pound the guys for what they did? Maxine asked, a little surprised. Of course I do. They deserve a good beatdown for doing what they did and for getting off with almost no punishment. Cicely said, then she smiled. Arnold knew that comforting his mother was more important. Ah, you really want to suck him off now? Maxine said. Arnold had to go into the dorm room to see what the beta tester package had in it, then went back out to the hallway and texted Kelly back and forth about everything. When the 2-hour time limit approached, he told her that he needed to go help Doris and that he would be going to bed afterwards. Make sure you take good care of her. Kelly texted. She's doing her best to watch out for you. Okay. Arnold texted back. I'll text you again tomorrow night. I love you. Kelly texted. Good night. I love you, too. Good night. Kiss emoji, Arnold sent and then went back into his dorm room and slipped on a pair of jeans and a tight t-shirt. Where are you going? His neighbor Emily asked as he came over to the door. Doris needs some help moving things. Arnold said and shut and locked his door. Emily smiled. It's nice to have a strong man around to do those things. That's what she said. Arnold said and walked down the hallway. The girls all pretty much asked the same thing and agreed with Emily. It really was nice to have him around in case they needed help. Arnold went down to the ground floor and stepped out of the elevator, and Doris already had her "back in the morning" sign on the high shelf on the front of her desk. She held the small room door open for him and he stepped by her, then she closed the door and locked it. Detective Tanner didn't get the chance to visit Jake's house until very late at night, and she sighed as she did her best to go over the scene in the dark. She had a pen light, so she wouldn't disturb the house's occupants with her normal flashlight, and she searched all around the concrete patio for any signs of a struggle or even the hint that someone else was there. She only found trampled and slightly torn up grass from multiple footprints and the tires on the stretcher. It was almost the worst possible scene to process, because of all the people that had been around the body. I know he was killed. I just know it. Detective Tanner thought and made a slow retreat back to her unmarked car. She looked at the addresses of the group and saw that one lived not that far away. On a whim, she drove over to the next boy's house and came to a stop near the place. There was a fence around part of it and it had clear and easy access to both the yard and the house. Then something caught her eye. Several of the nearby poles had multiple papers stapled to them and she got out of her car to go and look at the top one. Missing dog. If you see this dog, call us immediately. Small reward if found. Detective Tanner read and looked at the picture. That's a fairly big dog to just run away, she thought. If she had anything like a sixth sense, it would have been going off like an alarm bell. She didn't, though. She marked what she thought was a minor detail onto her notepad and climbed back into her car and drove home. She had an early morning to prepare for and needed to get some sleep. An hour later, a tired and exhilarated Doris entered her house and walked by the living room. "Hey, Ma," Cicely said, and Doris stopped walking and looked in on her. "Hi, sweetie." "Hey, girls," Doris said to her daughter and her friends. "You're lucky you're not drinking. We'd never do that on a weekday," Maxine said. "Unless we were off the next day. It's not my fault the professor loves me and gives me the day off sometimes," Cicely said. "What do you mean it's not your fault?" Amy asked accusingly, and Cicely laughed. "I'd swear if he wasn't such a germaphobe, he'd have been all over your ass from day one," Maxine said, and that made everyone laugh, even Doris. "Don't stay up too late," Doris said, and just before she turned to walk away, she saw the newspaper on the coffee table. "What's that?" she asked and came into the room instead. "Oh, right. You've got to read this, Ma," Cicely said and handed her the newspaper. "It's appalling and amazing." Doris thought that was an odd description for a single news story and sat down on the couch to read it. Arnold was back in his room and washed up, then waved at the girls. "Good night," he said, and they said it back. Then he closed his door and went to his bed to go to sleep. The next morning, he woke up and had a sensible breakfast, dressed for work, and went out into the hallway. It was a regular thing now, and all of the girls said good morning. Even the ones that initially were skittish and tried to cover themselves up the first few times he had walked by during that first week, were now as casual in their bras, panties, and towels as the other girls. They had direct experience with him now, and they all knew that Arnold didn't leer at them, or try to take discreet pictures, or even take brief liberties with them like caresses or accidentally bumping into them. Even though they would have been any other guy's dream girl fantasy as he walked down the hallway of half-naked women, he never gave them that feeling of being objectified. All of the girls treasured that, and him. Arnold rode the elevator down to the ground floor and stepped out. There were a few girls around and he waved to Doris. "Good morning. Come here," Doris said without returning the greeting. Arnold walked over to her and she stood up and came around her desk. She wore her normal form-fitting blouse and tight black dress pants, and even though she was 5 inches shorter than him, she seemed to be a lot taller and commanded more attention. "Thank you," Arnold said and glanced at the witnesses. "You can thank me later," Doris whispered and then spoke normally. "Have a good day at work." Arnold nodded and walked towards the front door. "What article?" one of the girls asked, and Doris told her about the newspaper. By lunchtime, word had spread and nearly everyone had read or heard about it, so when Arnold went to get something to eat at the cafeteria with Cicely and the lab workers, a lot of people greeted him or nodded their heads at him. "You're a good boy," the woman behind the counter said with her voice full of warmth as she handed him a heaping plate of food. Arnold nodded to her and walked down to the register to pay for it. Angela put his regular root beer soda on his tray. "Your girlfriend is very lucky to have someone like you," she said, and took his money and gave him his change. "What's with everyone today?" Amy asked as the three of them walked over to the table where Maxine and a couple of the other girls waited for them. "A lot of people read the newspaper, apparently," Maxine said as they sat down and waved at the girl next to her with dreadlocks. I'm not sure how word spread so fast, though. It was the girls in his dorm. The black woman with dreadlocks said. Once Doris told them about it, well. I think they all appreciate what you did for your mom. Maxine said to Arnold and gave him a thumbs up. Good job. Amy laughed. You're supposed to hand him a treat or something if you're doing the whole positive reinforcement shtick. We're in public. Maxine said. I don't think everyone would understand if I whipped my tit out to let him suck on it. Ha ha. You think that's a treat? Cicely asked. It's one of the best. Maxine said, quite proudly. My nipple is to die for. That made all the girls at the table laugh. Then as they ate, they started to compare the qualities of what they thought the best nipple would be like. Arnold sat there and ate his food and listened this time. When the conversation was nearly over, Maxine turned to look at Arnold. What do you think, Arnold? Maxine asked, hoping to embarrass him a little and tease him, too. Who do you think has the best nipple? Arnold finished eating and looked at her. To be a fair judge, I would have to see them all to compare them for looks. He said and stood up as he picked up his tray. I'd have to suck on them to compare the texture. See you tomorrow. They all watched as he went back to the counter and dropped off the empty plate and left the cafeteria. He did not just say that he wants to suck on all of our nipples. The black girl with the dreadlocks said. He didn't, right? I didn't hear that, did I? He's got balls. Maxine said with a smile. I thought us talking about it was making him nervous when he wasn't saying anything, so I asked him to tease him. That kind of backfired. Amy said. Maybe because you said that you'd let him suck on your nipple. Maxine chuckled. I would, though. Yeah, me too. The black girl with the dreadlocks said. Any guy that proves that he loves his mama in public deserves a few treats. He completely ignored everything you've been doing to get his attention. Amy said. I thought it was because his mom warned him about me that he ignored what I did the day we met, but maybe he just doesn't see the obvious signs like that. If that's the case, how many girls have been flirting with him since he got here? The girl at the end of the table asked. How many think he's rejected them out of hand only because he didn't notice? Cicely and Amy lifted their hands, as did Maxine. Two girls at the next table put up their hands, and then the girl at the register put hers up. We need a wider base of comparison. The girl at the end said and stood up, then repeated the same two questions. About 15 more girls put up their hands in response. My sociology teacher is going to love my next paper. That made a lot of people laugh. Arnold went back to work and learned a little more, then the professor loaned him the next book to expand his knowledge. He left work and went back to his dorm room and closed his door, then changed into casual clothes and sat down with the book. He set his alarm to remind himself when to eat and then began to read. Not surprisingly, when classes ended for the day and everyone else in the dorm returned, they missed seeing Arnold there. His door was shut and they assumed he wasn't there, not knowing that if he sees that the other doors are shut that he shuts his, and their afternoon was a little dimmer and less lively than usual. They didn't realize just how much they looked forward to seeing him every day. Arnold ate in his room and set his alarm back for the morning, then continued to read. Once again, he took the professor's advice when he finished the book and let the knowledge sit and percolate through his other knowledge. He still had a bit of trouble associating the chemical formulas properly, so he knew he needed a lot more chemistry knowledge to help him continue. He had an appointment with Professor Power for the next day and perhaps that would help him. He would discuss it with her and see if she had any more insights into what he could do in the future. He put the book down and changed for bed, climbed in and picked up his cell phone. After a quick texting round with Kelly to let her know what was going on, he went to sleep. The next day went by quick as a flash and Arnold had his appointment with Professor Power. They talked about the latest knowledge he had gained and she was impressed that he could retain so much so quickly. She helped him with the formula integration, then for several hours instructed him on several important other things he would need when he read some of the other books in her collection. After that, it was his turn to help her.